Hello. Let's read a book. Today's book, favorite of mine from long ago. I've not read it in many years though. Let's read it now. Christopher Moore's Lamb, a novel. The Gospel According to Biff, Christ's childhood pal. The back of the book. The birth of Jesus has been well chronicled, as have his glorious teachings, acts, and divine sacrifice after his 30th birthday. But no one knows about the early life of the Son of God, the missing years, except Biff, the Messiah's best bud, who has been resurrected to tell the story in this divinely hilarious, yet heartfelt work, reminiscent of Vogonut and Douglas Adams. Verily, the story Biff has to tell is a miraculous one, filled with remarkable journeys, magic, healings, kung fu, corpse reanimations, demons, and hot babes. Even the considerable wiles and devotions of the Savior's pal may not be enough to divert Joshua from his tragic destiny. But there's no one who loves Josh more, except maybe Maggie, Mary of Magdala, and Biff isn't about to let his extraordinary pal suffer and ascend without a fight. Let's get started. Ever wonder what Jesus did during his formative years before the first miracle at Cana? Get the inside scoop from Biff, JC's best friend, in addition to hearing firsthand the fascinating, funny story on Jesus' missing years. You'll learn a lot of other cool stuff about the greatest story never told, until now. Lamb, the Gospel According to Biff, Christ's childhood pal, is a behind-the-scenes look at the original Boy Wonder. A few of the neat things you'll discover in these pages are: what to do if your kid's face suddenly appears on every loaf of bread in town, the proper method for choosing a harlot, how sarcasm was invented, yeah, really, the history of the martial art specifically designed for boys from Nazareth, also known as judo, when the rough draft of the Sermon on the Mount sounded like, how to tell when an image of the Virgin Mary is a bona fide vision and when it's just elephant poop, how bunnies came to be associated with Easter, and much more. The author's blessing. If you have come to these pages for laughter, may you find it. If you are here to be offended, may your ire rise and your blood boil. If you seek an adventure, may this story sing you away to blissful escape. If you need to test or confirm your beliefs, may you reach comfortable conclusions. All books reveal perfection by what they are or what they are not. May you find that which you seek in these pages or outside them. May you find perfection and know it by name. Prologue. The angel was cleaning out his closets when the call came. Halos and moonbeams were sorted into piles according to brightness. Satchels of wrath and scabbards of lightning hung on hooks waiting to be dusted. A wineskin of glory had leaked in the corner and the angel blotted it with a wad of fabric. Each time he turned the cloth, a muted chorus rang from the closet, as if he'd clamped the lid down on a pickle jar full of hallelujah chorus. Raziel, what in heaven's name are you doing? The Archangel Stefan was standing over him, brandishing a scroll like a rolled-up magazine over a piddling puppy. Orders? The angel asked. Dirtside. I was just there. 2 millennia ago. Really? Raziel checked his watch, then tapped the crystal. Are you sure? What do you think? Stefan held out the scroll so Raziel could see the burning bush seal. When do I leave? I was almost finished here. Now, act the gift of tongues and some minor miracles. No weapons, it's not a wrath job. You'll be undercover. Very low profile, but important. It's all in the order. Stefan handed him the scroll. Why me? I asked that too. And? I was reminded why angels are cast out. Whoa, that big? Stefan coughed, clearly in affectation since angels didn't breathe. I'm not sure I'm supposed to know, but the rumor is that it's a new book. You're kidding. A sequel. Revelations 2, just when you thought it was safe to sin. It's a gospel. A gospel? After all this time? Who? Levi, who was called Biff. Raziel dropped his rag and stood. This has to be a mistake. It comes directly from the sun. There's a reason Biff isn't mentioned in the other books, you know. He's a total, don't say it, but he's such an asshole. You talk like that and you wonder why you get dirt duty. Why now, after so long? The 4 Gospels have been fine so far. And why him? Because it's some kind of anniversary in Dirt Dweller time of the sun's birth, and he feels it's time the whole story is told. Raziel hung his head. I'd better pack. Gift of tongues, Stefan reminded. Of course, so I can take crap in 1,000 languages. Go get the good news, Raziel. Bring me back some chocolate. Chocolate? It's a Dirt Dweller snack. You'll like it. Satan invented it. Devil's food? You can only eat so much white cake, my friend. Midnight. The angel stood on a barren hillside on the outskirts of the holy city of Jerusalem. He raised his arms aloft, and a dry wind whipped his white robe around him. Arise, Levi, who was called Biff. A whirlwind formed before him, pulling dust from the hillside into a column that took the shape of a man. Arise, Biff, your time has come. The wind whipped into a fury, and the angel pulled the sleeve of his robe across his face. Arise, Biff, and walk again among the living. The whirlwind began to subside, leaving the man-shaped column of dust standing on the hillside. In a moment, the hillside was calm again. The angel pulled a gold vessel from his satchel and poured it over the column. The dust washed away, leaving a muddy, naked man sputtering in the starlight. Welcome back to the living, the angel said. The man blinked, then held his hand before his eyes, as if he expected to see through it. I'm alive, he said in a language he had never heard before. Yes. What are these sounds? These words? You have been given the gift of tongues. I've always had the gift of tongues. Ask any girl I've known. What are these words? Languages. You've been given the gift of languages, as were all the apostles. Then the kingdom has come. Yes. How long? 2,000 years ago. You worthless bag of dog shit, said Levi, who was called Biff, as he punched the angel in the mouth. You're late. The angel picked himself up and gingerly touched his lip. Nice talk to the angel of the Lord. It's a gift, Biff said. Part 1. The Boy. God is a comedian playing to an audience that is afraid to laugh. Voltaire. Chapter 1. You think you know how this story is going to end, but you don't. Trust me, I was there. I know. The first time I saw the man who would save the world, he was sitting near the central well in Nazareth with a lizard hanging out of his mouth. Just the tail end, and the hind legs were visible on the outside. The head and forelegs were halfway down the hatch. He was 6, like me, and his beard had not come in fully, so he didn't look much like the pictures you've seen of him. His eyes were like dark honey, and they smiled at me out of the mop of blue-black curls that framed his face. There was a light older than Moses in those eyes. Unclean! Unclean, I screamed, pointing at the boy so my mother would see that I knew the law, but she ignored me, as did all the other mothers who were filling their jars at the well. The boy took the lizard from his mouth and handed it to his younger brother, who sat beside him in the sand. The younger boy played with the lizard for a while, teasing it until it reared its little head as if to bite. Then he picked up a rock and smashed the creature's head. Bewildered, he pushed the dead lizard around in the sand. And once assured that it wasn't going anywhere on its own, he picked it up and handed it back to his older brother. Into his mouth went the lizard, and before I could accuse, out it came again, squirming and alive, and ready to bite once again. He handed it back to his younger brother, who smote it mightily with the rock, starting or ending the whole process again. I watched the lizard die 3 more times before I said, I want to do that too. The Savior removed the lizard from his mouth and said, Which part? By the way, his name was Joshua. Jesus is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Yeshua, which is Joshua. Christ is not a last name, it's the Greek for Messiah, a Hebrew word meaning anointed. I have no idea what the H in Jesus H Christ stood for. One of the things I should have asked him. Me? I am Levi, who was called Biff. No middle initial. Joshua was my best friend. Now, the angel says I'm supposed to just sit down and write my story. Forget about what I've seen in this world, but how am I to do that? In the last 3 days, I've seen more people, more images, more wonders than in all my 33 years of living, and the angel asked me to ignore them? Yes, I have been given the gift of tongues, so I see nothing without knowing the word for it, but what good does that do? Did it help in Jerusalem to know that it was a Mercedes that terrified me and sent me diving into a dumpster? Moreover, after Raziel pulled me out and ripped my fingernails back as I struggled to stay hidden, did it help to know that it was a Boeing 747 that made me cower in a ball trying to rock away my own tears and shut out the noise and fire? Am I a little child afraid of its own shadow, or did I spend 27 years at the side of the Son of God? On the hill where he pulled me from the dust, the angel said, "You will see many strange things. Do not be afraid, you have a holy mission, and I will protect you." Smug bastard. Had I known what he would do to me, I would have hit him again. Even now, he lies on the bed across the room, watching pictures move on a screen, eating the sticky sweet called Snickers while I scratch out my tail on this soft as silk paper that reads Hyatt Regency St. Louis at the top. Words, 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 a million words circle in my head like hawks, waiting to dive onto the page to rend and tear the only 2 words I want to write. Why me? There were 15 of us. Well, 14 after I hung Judas, so why me? Joshua always told me not to be afraid, for he would always be with me. Where are you, my friend? Why have you forsaken me? You wouldn't be afraid here. The towers and machines and the shine and stink of this world would not daunt you. Come now, I'll order a pizza for room service. You would like pizza. The servant who brings it is named Jesus, and he's not even a Jew. You always liked irony. Come, Joshua. The angel says you are yet with us. You can hold him down while I pound him. Then we will rejoice in pizza. Raziel has been looking at my writing and is insisting that I stop whining and get on with the story. Easy for him to say. He didn't just spend the last 2,000 years buried in the dirt. Nevertheless, he won't let me order pizza until I finish a section, so here goes. I was born in Galilee, the town of Nazareth, in the time of Herod the Great. My father Alphaeus was a stonemason and my mother Naomi was plagued by demons. Or at least that's what I told everyone. Joshua seemed to think she was just difficult. My proper name Levi comes from the brother of Moses, the progenitor of the tribe of priests. My nickname Biff comes from our slang word for a smack upside the head, something that my mother said I required at least daily from an early age. I grew up under Roman rule, although I didn't see many Romans until I was 10. The Romans mostly stayed in the fortress city of Sepphoris, an hour's walk north of Nazareth. That's where Joshua and I saw a Roman soldier murdered, but I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, assume the soldier is safe and sound and happy wearing a broom on his head. Most of the people of Nazareth were farmers, growing grapes and olives on the rocky hills outside of town, and barley and wheat in the valleys below. There were also herders of goats and sheep whose families lived in town, while the men and older boys tended the flocks in the highlands. Our houses were all made of stone, and ours had a stone floor, though many had floors of hard-packed dirt. I was the oldest of 3 sons, so even at the age of 6, I was being prepared to learn my father's trade. My father taught my spoken lessons, the law and stories from the Torah and Hebrew, and my father took me to the synagogue to hear the elders read the Bible. Aramaic was my first language. By the time I was 10, I could speak and read Hebrew as well as most of the men. My ability to learn Hebrew and the Torah was spurred on by my friendship with Joshua, for while the other boys would be playing around of tease the sheep or kick the Canaanite, Joshua and I played at being rabbis, and he insisted that we stick to the authentic Hebrew for our ceremonies. It was more fun than it sounds, or at least it was until my mother caught us trying to circumcise my little brother Shem with a sharp rock. What a fit she threw. And my argument that Shem needed to renew his covenant with the Lord didn't seem to convince her. She beat me to stripes with an olive switch and forbade me to play with Joshua for a month. Did I mention she was besought with demons? Overall, I think she was good for little Shem. I think it was good for little Shem. He was the only kid I knew who could pee around corners. You can make a pretty good living as a beggar with that kind of talent, and he never even thanked me. Brothers. Children see magic because they look for it. When I first met Joshua, I didn't know he was a savior, and neither did he for that matter. What I knew was that he wasn't afraid. Amid a race of conquered warriors, a people who tried to find pride while cowering before God in Rome, he shone like a bloom in the desert. But maybe only I saw it because I was looking for it. To everyone else, he seemed like just another child, the same needs and same chance to die before he was grown. When I told my mother of Joshua's trick with the lizard, she checked me for fever and sent me to my sleeping mat with only a bowl of broth for supper. I've heard stories about that boy's mother, she said to my father. She claims to have spoken to an angel of the Lord. She told Esther that she had borne the Son of God. What did you say to Esther? That she should be careful that the Pharisees not hear her ravings, or we'd be picking stones for her punishment. That you should not speak it of again. I know her husband. He is a righteous man. Cursed with an insane girl for a wife. Poor thing, my father said, tearing away a hunk of bread. His hands were as hard as horn, as square as hammers, and as gray as a leper's from the limestone he worked with. An embrace from him left scratches on my back that sometimes wept blood. Yet my brothers and I fought to be the first in his arms when he returned from work each evening. The same injuries inflicted in anger would have sent us crying to our mother's skirts. I fell asleep each night feeling his hand on my back like a shield. Fathers. Do you want to mash some lizards? I asked Joshua when I saw him again. He was drawing in the dirt with a stick, ignoring me. I put my foot on his drawing. Did you know your mother is mad? My father does that to her, he said sadly, without looking up. I sat down next to him. Sometimes my mother makes yipping noises in the night like the wild dogs. Is she mad? Joshua asked. She seems fine in the morning. She sings while she makes breakfast. Joshua nodded, satisfied. I guess that madness could pass. We used to live in Egypt, he said. No, you didn't. That's too far. Farther than the temple, even. The temple in Jerusalem was the farthest place I had been as a child. Every spring, my family took the 5-day walk to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. It seemed to take forever. We lived here, then we lived in Egypt. Now we live here again, Joshua said. It was a long way. You lie, it takes 40 years to get to Egypt. Not anymore, it's closer now. It says in the Torah, my abbot read it to me, the Israelites traveled in the desert for 40 years. The Israelites were lost. For 40 years, I laughed. The Israelites must be stupid. We are the Israelites. We are? Yes. I have to go find my mother, I said. When you come back, let's play Moses and Pharaoh. The angel has confided in me that he is going to ask the Lord if he can become Spider-Man. He watches the television constantly, even when I sleep, and has become obsessed with the story of the hero who fights demons from the rooftops. The angel says that evil looms larger now than it did in my time, and that calls for greater heroes. The children need heroes, he says. I think he just wants to swing from buildings in tight red jammies. What hero could touch these children anyway with their machines and medicine and distances made invisible? Raziel, not hero weak, and he would trade the sword of God to be a web slinger. In my time, our heroes were few, but they were real. Some of us could even trace our kinship to them. Joshua always played the heroes. David, Joshua, Moses. Well, I played the evil ones. Pharaoh, Ahab, and Nebuchadnezzar. If I had a shekel for every time I was slain as a Philistine, well, I'd not be riding a camel through the eye of a needle anytime soon, I'll tell you that. As I think back, I think that Joshua was practicing for what he would become. Let my people go, said Joshua as Moses. Okay. You can't just say okay. Can't? No, the Lord has hardened your heart against my demands. Why'd he do that? I don't know, he just did. Now let my people go. Nope. I crossed my arms and turned away like someone whose heart is hardened. Behold, as I turn this stick into a snake. Now let my people go. Okay. You can't just say okay. Why? That was a pretty good trick with the stick. That's not how it goes. Okay. No way, Moses. Your people have to stay. Joshua waved his staff in my face. Behold, I will plague you with frogs. They will fill your house and your bedchamber and get on your stuff. So that's bad. Let my people go, Pharaoh. I sort of like frogs. Dead frogs. Piles of steaming, stinking, dead frogs. Oh, in that case, you better take your people and go. I have some sphinxes and stuff to build anyway. Damn it, Biff, that's not how it goes. I have more plagues for you. I want to be Moses. You can't. Why not? I have the stick. Oh. And so it went. I'm not sure I took to playing the villains as easily as Joshua took to being the heroes. Sometimes we recruited our little brothers to play the more loathsome parts. Joshua's little brother Judah and James played whole populations like the Sodomites outside of Lot's door. Send out those 2 angels so that we can know them. I won't do that, I said, playing Lot, a good guy, only because Joshua wanted to play the angels. But I have 2 daughters who don't know anyone. You can meet them. Okay, said Judah. I threw open the door and led my imaginary daughters outside so they could know the Sodomites. Pleased to meet you. Charmed, I'm sure. Nice to meet you. That's not how it goes, Joshua shouted. You're supposed to try to break the door down, then I will smite you blind. Then you destroy our city, James said. Yes, we'd rather meet Lot's daughters. Let my people go, said Judah, who was only 4 and often got his stories confused. He particularly liked the Exodus because he and James got to throw jars of water on me as I led my soldiers across the Red Sea after Moses. That's it, Joshua said. Judah, you're Lot's wife. Go stand over there. Sometimes Judah had to play Lot's wife no matter what story we were doing. I don't want to be Lot's wife. Be quiet. Pillars of salt can't talk. I don't want to be a girl. Our brothers always played the female parts. I had no sisters to torment, and Joshua's only sister, Elizabeth, was still a baby. That was before we met the Magdalene. The Magdalene changed everything. After I overheard my parents talking about Joshua's mother's madness, I often watched her, looking for signs, but she seemed to go about her duties like all the other mothers. Tending to the little ones, working in the garden. Thank you, Floppy. Working in the garden, fetching water, and preparing food. There was no signs of going about on all 4s or foaming at the mouth as I had expected. That's fine. The book continues. As I expected, she was younger than many of the mothers and much younger than her husband Joseph, who was an old man by the standards of our time. Joshua said that Joseph wasn't his real father, but he wouldn't say who his father was. When the subject came up and Mary was in earshot, she would call to Josh that put her finger to her lips to signal silence. Now is not the time, Joshua. Biff would not understand. Just hearing her say my name made my heart leap. Early on, I developed a little boy love for Joshua's mother that sent me into fantasies of marriage and family and future. Your father's old, huh, Josh? Not too old. When he dies, will your mother marry his brother? My father has no brothers. Why? No reason. What would you think if your father was shorter than you? He isn't. But when your father dies, your mother could marry someone shorter than you, and he would be your father. You would have to do what he says. My father will never die. He is eternal. So you say, but I think that when I'm a man and your father dies, I will take your mother as my wife. Joshua made a face now as if he had bitten into an unripe fig. Don't say that, Biff. I don't mind that she's mad. I like her blue cloak and her smile. I'll be a good father. I'll teach you how to be a stonemason, and I'll only beat you when you're our snot. I would rather play with lepers than listen to this. Joshua began to walk away. Wait, be nice to your father, Joshua Bar Biff. My own father used my full name like this when he was trying to make a point. Is it not the word of Moses that you must honor me? Little Joshua spun on his heel. My name is not Joshua Bar Biff, and it's not Joshua Bar Joseph either. It's Joshua Bar Jehovah. I looked around, hoping that no one had heard him. I didn't want my only son. I planned to sell Judah and James into slavery, to be stoned to death for uttering the name of God in vain. Don't say that, Josh. I won't marry your mother. No, you won't. I'm sorry. I forgive you. She'll make an excellent concubine. Don't let anyone tell you that the Prince of Peace never struck anyone. In those early days, before he had become who he would be, Joshua smote me in the nose more than once. That was the first time. Mary would stay my one true love until I saw the Magdalene. If the people of Nazareth thought Joshua's mother was mad, there was little said of it out of respect for her husband Joseph. He was wise in the law, the prophets, and the Psalms, and there were few wives in Nazareth who didn't serve supper in one of his smooth olive wood bowls. He was fair, strong, and wise. People said that he had once been in a scene. One of the dour, ascetic Jews who kept to themselves and never married or cut their hair. But he did not congregate with them, and unlike them, he still had the ability to smile. In those early years, I saw him very little, as he was always in Sepphoris, building structures for the Romans and the Greeks and the landed Jews of that city. But every year, as the feasts of first approached, Joseph would stop his work in the fortress city and stay home, carving bowls and spoons to give to the temple. During the feasts of first, it was the tradition to give first lambs, first grain, and first fruits of the priests of the temple. Even firstborn sons during the year were dedicated to the temple, either by promising them for labor when they were older, or by a gift of money. Craftsmen like my father and Joseph could give things that they made, and in some years my father fashioned mortars and pestles or grinding stones for the tribute, while others he gave tithes of coin. Some people made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem for this feast, but since it fell only 7 weeks after Passover, many families could not afford to make the pilgrimage, and the gifts went to our simple village synagogue. During the weeks leading up to the feast, Joshua sat outside of his house in the shade of the awning he had made, worrying the gnarled olive wood with adze and chisel, while Joshua and I played at his feet. He wore the single-piece tunic that we all wore, a rectangle of fabric with neck holes in the middle, belted with a sash so that the sleeves fell to the elbows, and the hem fell to the knees. Perhaps this year I should give the temple my first son, Joshua. Wouldn't you like to clean the altar after the sacrifices? He grinned to himself without looking up from his work. I owe them a first son, you know. We were in Egypt at the first feast when you were born. The idea of coming in contact with blood clearly terrified Joshua, as it would any Jewish boy. Give them James, Abba. He is your first son. Joseph shot a glance my way to see if I had reacted. I had, but it was because I was considering my own status as first son, hoping that my father wasn't thinking along the same lines. James is a second son. The priests don't want second sons. It will have to be you. Joshua looked at me before he answered, then back at his father. Then he smiled. But Abba, if you should die, who will take care of Mother if I am at the temple? Someone will look after her, I said. I'm sure of it. I will not die for a long time, Joseph said, tugged at his gray beard. My beard goes white, but there's a lot of life left in me yet. Don't be so sure, Abba, Joshua said. Joseph dropped the bowl he was working on and stared into his hands. Run along and play, you two, his voice a little more than a whisper. Joshua stood and walked away. I wanted to throw my arms around the old man, for I'd never seen a grown man afraid before. And it frightened me, too. Can I help? I said, pointing to the half-finished bowl that lay in Joseph's lap. You go with Joshua. He needs a friend to teach him to be human. Then I can teach him to be a man. Chapter 2. The angel wants me to convey more of Joshua's grace. Grace? I'm writing about a 6-year-old, for Christ's sake. How much grace could he have? It's not like Joshua walked around professing he was the son of God every day of the week. He was a pretty normal kid for the most part. There was the trick he did with the lizards, and once we found a dead meadowlark and he brought it back to life. And there was a time when we were 8 when he healed his brother Judah's fractured skull after a game of Stone the Adulteress got out of hand. Judah could never get the knack of being an adulteress. He'd stand there stiff as Lot's wife. You can't do that. An adulteress has to be wily and nimble-footed. The miracles Joshua performed were small and quiet, as miracles tend to be, once you get used to them. But trouble came from the miracles that happened around him, without his volition, as it were. Bread and serpents come to mind. It was a few days before the Passover feast, and many of the families of Nazareth were not making the pilgrimage to Jerusalem that year. There had been little rain through our winter season, so it was going to be a hard year. Many farmers could not afford the time away from their fields to travel to and from the holy city. My father and Joshua's were both working in Sepphoris, and the Romans wouldn't give them time off work beyond the actual feast days. My mother had been making the unleavened bread when I came in from playing in the square. She held a dozen sheets of the flatbread before her, and she looked as if she was going to dash it to the floor any second. Biff, where is your friend Joshua? My little brothers grinned at me from behind her skirts. At home, I suppose. I just left him. What have you boys been doing? Nothing. I tried to remember if I had done anything that should make her this angry, but nothing came to mind. It was a rare day, and I'd made no trouble. Both my little brothers were unscathed as far as I knew. What have you done to cause this? She held out a sheet of the flatbread, and there, in crispy brown relief of the golden crust, was the image of my friend Joshua's face. She snatched up another sheet of bread, and there again was my friend Josh. Graven images. Big sin. Josh was smiling. Mother frowned on smiling. Well, do I need to go to Joshua's house and ask his poor, insane mother? I did this. I put Joshua's face on the bread. I just hope she didn't ask me how I'd done it. Your father will punish you when he comes home this evening. Now go, get out of here. I could hear my little brothers giggling as I slunk out the door, but once outside, things worsened. Women coming Women were coming away from their baking stones, and each held a sheet of unleavened bread, and each was muttering some variation of, "Hey, there's some kid on my bread." I ran to Joshua's house and stormed in without knocking. Joshua and his brothers were at the table eating. Mary was nursing Joshua's newest little sister, Miriam. You're in big trouble," I whispered in Josh's ear with enough force to blow out an eardrum. Joshua held up the flatbread he was eating and grinned, just like the face on his bread. "It's a miracle." "Tastes good too," said James, crunching off a corner of his brother's head. "It's all over town, Joshua, not just your house. Everyone's bread has your face on it." "He truly is the Son of God," Mary said with a beatific smile. "Oh, geez, Mother," James said. "Yeah, geez, Mom," said Judah. "His mug is all over the Passover feast. We have to do something." They didn't seem to get the gravity of the situation. I was already in trouble, and my mother didn't even suspect anything supernatural. "We have to cut your hair." "What?" "We cannot cut his hair," Mary said. She has always let Joshua wear his hair long, like in a scene, saying that he was a Nazarite like Samson. It was just another reason why many of the townspeople thought her mad. The rest of us wore our hair cut short, like the Greeks who had ruled our country since the time of Alexander, and the Romans after them. If we cut his hair, he looks like the rest of us. We can say it's someone else on the bread. "Moses. Young Moses. Yes. I'll get a knife. James, Judah, come with me. We have to tell the town that the face of Moses has come to visit us for the Passover feast." Mary pulled Miriam from her breast, bent, and kissed me on the forehead. "You are a good friend, Biff." I almost melted in my sandals, but I caught Joshua frowning at me. "It's not the truth," he said. "It will keep the Pharisees from judging you." "I'm not afraid of them," said the 9-year-old. "I didn't do this to the bread." "Then why take the blame and punishment for it?" "I don't know. Seems like I should, doesn't it?" "Sit still so your mother can cut your hair." I dashed out the door, Judah and James on my heels, the three of us bleeding like spring lambs. "Behold, Moses has put his face on the bread for Passover. Behold!" Miracles. She kissed me. Holy Moses on a matzo. She kissed me. The miracle of the serpent? It was an omen in a way, although I can only say that because of what happened between Joshua and the Pharisees later on. At the time, Joshua thought it was the fulfillment of a prophecy, or that's how he tried to sell it to his mother and father. It was late summer, and we were playing in a wheat field outside of town when Joshua found a nest of vipers. A nest of vipers, Joshua shouted. The wheat was so tall I couldn't see where he was calling from. "A pox on your family," I replied. "No, it's a nest of vipers over here, really." "Oh, I thought you were taunting me. Sorry, a pox off of your family." "Come see." I crashed through the wheat to find Joshua standing by a pile of stones a farmer had used to mark the boundary of his field. I screamed and backpedaled so quickly that I lost my balance and fell. A knot of snakes writhed at Joshua's feet, skating over his sandals and wrapping themselves around his ankles. "Joshua, get away from there." "They won't hurt me. It says so in Isaiah." "Just in case they haven't read the prophets." Joshua stepped aside, sending the snakes scattering, and there behind him was the biggest cobra I'd ever seen. It reared up until it was taller than my friend, spreading a hood like a coke. "Run, Joshua!" He smiled. "I'm gonna call her Sarah, after Abraham's wife. These are her children." "No kidding. Say goodbye now, Josh." "I want to show Mother. She loves prophecy." With that, he was off towards the village, the giant serpent following him like a shadow. The baby snake stayed in the nest, and I backed slowly away before running after my friend. I once brought a frog home, hoping to keep him as a pet. Not a large one, a one-handed frog, quiet and well-mannered. My mother made me release him, then cleanse myself in the immersion pool, the mikveh, at the synagogue. Still, she wouldn't let me in the house till after sunset because I was unclean. Joshua let a 14-foot-long cobra into his house and his mother squealed with joy. My mother never squealed. Mary slung the baby to her hip, kneeled in front of her son, and quoted Isaiah. "The wolf will also shall dwell within the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and the little child shall lead them. And the cow and the bear shall feed, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw and like the ox. And the sucking child shall play on the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the cockatrice's den." James, Judah, and Elizabeth cowered in the corner, too frightened to cry. I stood outside the doorway watching. The snake swayed behind Joshua as if preparing to strike. Her name is Sarah. They were cobras, not asps, I said. A whole pile of cobras. Can we keep her? Joshua asked. I'll catch rats for her and make a bed for her next to Elizabeth's. Definitely not asps. I'd know an asp if I saw one. Probably not a cockatrice either. I'd say a cobra. Actually, I didn't know an asp from a hole in the ground. Shush, Biff, Mary said. My heart broke with the harshness in my love's voice. Just then, Joseph rounded the corner and went through the door before I could catch him. No worries, he was back outside in an instant. Jumping Jehoshaphat! I checked to see if Joseph's heart had failed, having quickly decided that once Mary and I were married, the snake would have to go, or at least sleep outside, but the burly carpenter seemed only shaken, and a little dusty from his backwards dive through the door. Not an asp, right? I asked. Asps are made small to fit the breasts of Egyptian queens, right? Joseph ignored me. Back away slowly, son. I'll get a knife from my workshop. She won't hurt us, Joshua said. Her name is Sarah. She's from Isaiah. It is in the prophecy, Joseph, Mary said. I could see Joseph searching his memory for the passage. Although only a layman, he knew his scripture as well as anyone. I don't remember the part about Sarah. I don't think it's prophecy, I offered. It says asps, and it definitely is not an asp. I'd say she was going to bite Joshua's ass off if you don't grab her, Joseph. Guy has to try. Can I keep her? Joshua asked. Joseph had regained his composure by now. Evidently, once you accept that your wife slept with God, extraordinary events seem sort of commonplace. Take her back where you found her, Joshua, and the prophecy has been fulfilled now. But I want to keep her. No, Joshua, you're not the boss of me. I suspected that Joseph had heard that one before. Just so. Please take Sarah back where you found her. Joshua stormed out of the house, his snake following close behind. Joshua and I gave them a wide berth. Or Joseph and I gave them a wide berth. Try not to let anyone see you, Joseph said. They won't understand. He was right, of course. On our way out of the village, we ran into a gang of older boys, led by Jachan, the son of Iban the Pharisee. They did not understand. There were perhaps a dozen Pharisees in Nazareth, learned men, working-class teachers who spent much of their time at the synagogue debating the law. They were often hired as judges and scribes, and this gave them great influence over the people of the village. So much influence, in fact, that the Romans often used them as mouthpieces to our people. With influence comes power, with power, abuse. Jachan was only the son of a Pharisee. He was only 2 years older than Joshua and me, but he was well on his way to mastering cruelty. If there is a single joy in having everyone you've ever known 2,000 years dead, it is that Jachan is one of them. May his fat crackle in the fires of hell for eternity. Joshua taught us that we should not hate, a lesson that I was never able to master, along with geometry. Blame Jachan for the former, Euclid for the latter. Joshua ran behind the houses and shops of the village, the snake behind him by 10 steps, and me behind her 10 steps more. As he rounded the corner by the smith's shop, Joshua ran into Jachan, knocking him to the ground. You idiot! Jachan shouted, rising and dusting himself off. His 3 friends laughed and he spun on them like an angry tiger. This one needs to have his face washed in dung. Hold him! The boys turned their focus on Joshua, 2 grabbing his arms while the 3rd punched him in the stomach. Jachan turned to look for a pile to rub Joshua's face in. Sarah slithered around the corner and reared up behind Joshua, spreading her glorious hood wide above our heads. Hey, I called as I rounded the corner. You guys think this is an asp? My fear of the snake had changed into a sort of wary affection. She seemed to be smiling. I know I was. Sarah swayed from side to side like a wheat stalk in the wind. The boys dropped Joshua's arms and ran to Jachan, who was turned and slowly backed away. Joshua was talking about asps, I continued, but I'd have to say that this here is a cobra. Joshua was bent over, still trying to catch his breath, but he looked back at me and grinned. Of course, I'm not the son of a Pharisee, but he's in league with a serpent, Jachan screamed. He consorts with demons. Demons, the other boys shouted, trying to crowd behind their fat friend. I will tell my father this and you'll be stoned. A voice from behind Jachan said, What is all this shouting? And a sweet voice it was. She came out of the house by the smith's shop. Her skin shone like copper, and she had the light blue eyes of the northern desert people. Wisps of reddish-brown hair showed at the edges of her purple shawl. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. But there was something very old in her eyes. I stopped breathing when I saw her. Jacon puffed up like a toad. "Stay back! These two were consorting with a demon! I will tell the elders and they will be judged." She spit at his feet. I had never seen a girl spit before. It was charming. "Looks like a cobra to me." "See, there, I told you." She walked up to Sarah as if she were approaching a fig tree looking for fruit. Not a hint of fear, only interest. "You think this is a demon?" she said, without looking back at Jacon. "Won't you be embarrassed when the elders find out that you mistook a common snake of the field for a demon?" "It is a demon." The girl reached her hand up, and the snake made as if to strike, then lowered its head until its forked tongue was brushing the girl's fingers. "This is definitely a cobra, little boy, and these two are probably leading it back to the fields where it would help the farmers by eating rats." "Yep, that's what we were doing." "Absolutely," Joshua said. The girl turned to Jacon and his friends. "A demon?" Jacon stomped like an angry donkey. "You are in league with them." "Don't be silly, my family has only just arrived from Magdala. I've never seen these two before, but it's obvious what they were doing. We do it all the time in Magdala, but then, this is a backwater village." "We do it here too," Jacon said. Well, these two make trouble." "Trouble," his friend said. "Why don't we let them get on with what they were doing?" Jacon, his eyes bouncing from the girl to the snake to the girl again, began to lead his friends away. "I will deal with you two another time." As soon as they were around the corner, the girl jumped back from the snake and ran towards the door of her house. "Wait," Joshua called. "I have to go. What is your name?" "I'm Mary of Magdala, daughter of Isaac. Call me Maggie." "Come with us, Maggie." "I can't, I have to go." "Why?" "Because I peed myself." She disappeared through the door. Miracles. Once we were back in the wheat field, Sarah headed for her den. We watched from a distance as she slid down the hole. "Josh, how did you do that?" "I have no idea." Is this kind of thing going to keep happening? Probably. We are going to get in a lot of trouble, aren't we? What am I, a prophet? I asked you first. Joshua stared to the sky like a man in a trance. "Did you see her?" "She was afraid of nothing." "She's a giant snake. What's to be afraid of?" Joshua frowned. "Don't pretend to be simple, Biff. We were saved by a serpent and a girl. I don't know what to think about that." "Why think about it at all? It just happened." "Nothing happens but by God's will," Joshua said. "It doesn't fit with the testament of Moses." "Maybe it's a New Testament," I said. "You aren't pretending, are you? You really are simple." "I think she likes you better than she likes me," I said. "The snake?" "Right, I'm the simple one." I don't know if now, having lived and died the life of a man, I can write about little boy love, but remembering it now, it seems the cleanest pain I've ever known. Love without desire, or conditions, or limits, a pure and radiant glow in the heart that could make me giddy and sad and glorious all at once. Where does it go? Why, in all their experiments, did the Magi never try to capture that purity in a bottle? Perhaps they couldn't. Perhaps it's lost to us when we become sexual creatures and no magic can bring it back. Perhaps I only remember it because I spent so long trying to understand the love that Joshua felt for everyone. In the East, they taught us that all suffering comes from desire, and that rough beast would stalk me throughout my life. But on that afternoon, and for a long time after, I touched grace. At night I would lie awake, listening to my brothers breathing against the silence of the house, and in my mind's eye, I could see her eyes like blue fire in the dark. Exquisite torture. I wonder now if Joshua didn't make her whole life like that. Maggie, she was the strongest of us all. After the miracle of the serpent, Joshua and I made up excuses to pass by the smith's shop, where we might run into Maggie. Every morning we would rise early and go to Joseph, volunteering to run to the smith for some nails or the repair of a tool. Poor Joseph took this as enthusiasm for carpentry. "Would you boys like to come to Sepphoris with me tomorrow?" Joseph asked us one day when we were badgering him about fetching nails. "Biff, would your father let you start learning the work of a carpenter?" I was mortified. At 10, a boy was expected to start learning his father's trade, but that was a year away. Forever when you're 9. I'm still thinking about what I'm going to do when I grow up, I said. My own father had made a similar offer to Joshua the day before. "So you won't become a stonecutter?" I was thinking about becoming the village idiot if my father will allow it. "He has a God-given talent," Joshua said. I've been talking to Bartholomew the idiot. He's gonna teach me to fling my own dung and run headlong into walls. Joseph scowled at me. Perhaps you two are yet too young. Next year. Yes, Joshua said. Next year. Maybe go now, Joseph. Biff is meeting Bartholomew for his lesson. Joseph nodded and we were off before he inflicted more kindness upon us. We actually had befriended Bartholomew, the village idiot. He was foul and drooled a lot, but he was large and offered some protection against Jacon and his bullies. Bart also spent most of his time begging near the town square, where the women came to fetch water from the well. From time to time, we caught a glimpse of Maggie as she passed, a water jar balanced on her head. You know, we are going to have to start working soon, Joshua said. I won't see you once I'm working with my father. Joshua, look around you. Do you see any trees? No. And the trees we do have, olive trees, twisted, gnarly, knotted things, right? Right. But you're going to be a carpenter like your father? There's a chance of it. One word, Josh. Rocks. Rocks? Look around, Josh. Rocks as far as the eye can see. Galilee is nothing but rocks, dirt, and more rocks. Be a stonemason like me and my father. We can build cities for the Romans. Actually, I was thinking about saving mankind. Forget that nonsense, Josh. Rocks, I tell you. Chapter 3. The angel will tell me nothing of what happened to my friends of the 12 of Maggie. All he'll say is that they are dead and I have to write my own version of the story. Oh, he'll tell me useless angel stories of how Gabriel disappeared once for 60 years, and they found him on Earth hiding inside the body of a man named Miles Davis, or how Raphael snuck out of heaven to visit Satan and returned with something called a cell phone. Evidently everyone in hell has them now. He watches the television, and when they show an earthquake or a tornado, he'll say, I destroyed a city with one of those once. Mine was better. I am awash in useless angel prattle, but about my own time I know nothing but what I saw. When the television makes mention of Joshua calling him by his Greek name Jesus, Braziel changes the channel before I can learn anything. He never sleeps, he just watches me, watches the television and eats. He never leaves the room. Today, while searching for extra towels, I opened one of the drawers and there, beneath a plastic bag meant for laundry, I found a book. Holy Bible, it said on the cover. Thank the Lord I did not take the book from the drawer, but opened it with my back to the angel. There are chapters there that were in no Bible I know. I saw the names of Matthew and John, I saw Romans and Galatians. This is a book of my time. What are you doing? The angel asked. I covered the Bible and closed the drawer. Looking for towels. I need to bathe. You bathed yesterday. Cleanliness is important to my people. I know that. What, you think I don't know that? You're not exactly the brightest halo in the bunch. Then bathe. Stand away from the television. Why don't you go get me some towels? I'll call down to the desk. And he did. If I'm going to get a good look at that book, I need to get the angel to leave the room. It came to pass that in the village of Jafia, the sister village of Nazareth, that Esther, the mother of one of the priests of the village, died of bad air. The Levite priests, or Sadducees, were rich from the tributes we paid to the temple, and mourners were hired from all of the surrounding villages. The families of Nazareth made the journey to the next hill for the funeral, and for the first time, Joshua and I were able to spend time with Maggie as we walked along the road. So, she said without looking at us, have you two been playing with any snakes lately? We've been waiting for the lion to lay down with the lamb, Joshua said. That's the next part of the prophecy. What prophecy? Never mind, I said. Snakes are for boys. We are almost men. We will begin work after the Feast of Tabernacles in Sepphoris. I was trying to sound worldly. Maggie seemed unimpressed. And you will learn to be a carpenter? She asked Joshua. I will do the work of my father eventually, yes. And you? She asked me. I'm thinking of becoming a professional mourner. How hard could it be? Tear at your hair, sing a dirge or two, take the rest of the week off. His father is a stonemason, Joshua said. We may both learn that skill. At my urging, my father had offered to take Joshua on as an apprentice if Joseph approved. Or a shepherd, I added quickly. Being a shepherd seems easy. I went to work at Kaliel last week to tend his flock. The law says that two must go with the flock to keep an abomination from happening. I can spot an abomination from 50 paces. Maggie smiled. And did you prevent any abominations? Oh yes, I kept all the abominations at bay, while Kaliel played with his favorite sheep behind the bushes. Biff, Joshua said gravely. That was the abomination you were supposed to prevent. It was? Yes. Oh, oops. Oh well. I think I would make an excellent mourner. Do you know the words to any dirges, Maggie? I'm gonna need to learn some dirges. I'll think that when I grow up, Maggie announced, I shall go back to Magdala and become a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee. I laughed. Don't be silly. You're a girl. You can't be a fisherman. Yes, I can. No, you can't. You have to marry and have sons. Are you betrothed, by the way? Joshua said, come with me, Maggie, and I will make you a fisher of men. What the hell does that mean? Maggie said. I grabbed Joshua by the back of his robe and began to drag him away. Don't pay any attention to him. He's mad. He gets it from his mother. Lovely woman, but a loony. Come now, Josh. Let's sing a dirge. I began improvising what I thought was a good funeral song. La la la, oh, we really, really sad that your mom is dead. Too bad you're a Saducee and don't believe in an afterlife, and your mom is just gonna be worm food, la la. Make you think you might want to reconsider, huh? Fa la la la, waka waka. It sounded really great in Aramaic, really. You two are silly. Gotta go, morning to do, see ya. A fisher of women? Josh said. Fa la la, don't feel bad, she was old and had no teeth left, la la la. Come on, people, you know the words. Later, I said, Josh, you can't keep saying creepy things like that, fisher of men. You want the Pharisees to stone you? Is that what you want? I'm only doing my father's work. Besides, Maggie is our friend. She wouldn't say anything. You're going to scare her away. No, I won't. She's gonna be with us, Biff. Are you gonna marry her? I don't even know if I'm allowed to marry at all, Biff. Look, we were topping the hill into Jafia, and we could see the crowd of mourners gathering around the village. Josh was pointing to a red crest that stood out above the crowd. The helmet crest of a Roman centurion. The centurion was talking to the Levite priest, who was arrayed in white and gold, his white beard reaching past his belt. As we moved into the village, we could see 20 or 30 other soldiers watching the crowd. Why are they here? They don't like it when we gather, Joshua said, pausing to study the centurion commander. They are here to see that we don't revolt. Why is the priest talking to him? The Sadducee wants to assure the Roman of his influence over us. It wouldn't do to have a massacre on the day of his mother's funeral. So he's watching out for us. He's watching out for himself. Only for himself. You shouldn't say that about a priest of the temple, Joshua. It was the first time I ever heard Joshua speak against the Sadducees, and it frightened me. Today I think the priest will learn who the temple belongs to. I hate when you talk like that, Josh. Maybe we should go home. Do you remember the dead meadowlark we found? I have a bad feeling about this. Joshua grinned at me. I could see gold flecks shining in his eyes. Sing your dirge, Biff. I think Maggie was impressed by your singing. Really? You think so? Nope. There was a crowd of 500 outside the tomb. In the front, the men had draped striped shawls over their heads and rocked as they prayed. The women were separated to the back, except for the wailing of the hired mourners. It was as if they didn't exist. I tried to catch a glimpse of Maggie, but I couldn't see her through the crowd. When I turned again, Joshua had wormed his way to the front of the men, where the Sadducees stood beside the corpse of his dead mother, reading from the scroll of the Torah. The women had wrapped the corpse in linen and anointed it with fragrant oils. I could smell sandalwood and jasmine amid the acrid sweat of the mourners as I made my way to the front and stood by Joshua. He looked past the priest and was staring at the corpse, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He was trembling as if taken by a chill wind. The priest finished his reading and began to sing, joined by the voices of hired singers who had made the journey all the way from the Temple of Jerusalem. It's good to be rich, huh? I whispered to Joshua, elbowing him in the ribs. He ignored me and balled up his fist at his side. A vein stood out on his forehead as he burned his gaze on the corpse. And she moved. Just a twitch at first, the jerk of her hand under the linen shroud. I think I was the only one who noticed. No, Joshua, don't, I said. I looked for the Romans, who were gathered in groups of 5 at different points around the perimeter of the crowd, looking bored, their hands resting on the hafts of their short swords. The corpse twitched again and raised her arm. There was a gasp in the crowd, and a boy screamed. The men started backing away, and the women pushed forward to see what was happening. Joshua fell to his knees and pressed his fist to his temples. The priest sang on. The corpse sat up. The singer stopped, and finally the priest turned to look behind him at his dead mother, who had swung her legs off the slab and looked as if she was trying to stand. The priest stumbled back into the crowd, clawing at the air before his eyes as if some vapor was causing this horrible vision. Joshua was rocking on his knees, tears streaming down his cheeks. The corpse stood, and still covered by the shroud, turned as if she was looking around. I could see that several of the Romans had drawn their swords. I looked around and found the commanding centurion standing on the back of a wagon, giving signals to his men to stay calm. When I looked back, I realized that Joshua and I had been deserted by the mourners, and we stood out in the empty space. "Stop it now, Josh," I whispered in his ear. They continued to rock and concentrate on the corpse, who took her first step. The crowd seemed to be transfixed by the walking corpse, but we were too isolated, too alone now with the dead. I knew it would only be seconds before they noticed Joshua rocking in the dirt. I threw my arm around his throat and dragged him back from the corpse and into a group of men who were wailing as they backed away. "Is he all right?" I heard at my ear. I turned to see Maggie standing beside me. "Help me get him away." Maggie took one of Joshua's arms and I took the other as we dragged him away. His body was stiff as a walking staff, and he kept his eyes trained on the corpse. The dead woman was walking towards her son, the priest, who was backing away, brandishing the scroll like a sword, his eyes as big as saucers. Finally, the woman fell in the dirt, twitched, then lay still. Joshua went limp in our arms. "Let's get him out of here," I said to Maggie. She nodded and helped me drag him behind the wagon where the centurion was directing his troops. "Is he dead?" the centurion asked. Joshua was blinking as if he'd just been awakened from a deep sleep. "We're never sure, sir," I said. The centurion threw his head back and laughed. His scale armor rattled with the tossing of his shoulders. He was older than the other soldiers, gray-haired, but obviously lean and strong, and totally unconcerned with the histrionics of the crowd. "Good answer, boy. What is your name?" "Biff, sir. Levi Bar Alphaeus, who is called Biff, sir, of Nazareth." "Well, Biff, I am Gaius Justus Gallicus, under commander of Sepphoris, and I think you Jews should make sure your dead are dead before you bury him." "Yes, sir." "You girl, you're a pretty little thing. What's your name?" I could see that Maggie was shaken by the attention of the Roman. I am Mary of Magdala, sir." She wiped at Joshua's brow with the edge of her shawl as he spoke. "You will break someone's heart someday, little one?" Maggie didn't answer, but I must have shown some reaction to the question because Justice laughed again. "Or perhaps she already has, Biff?" "It is our way, sir. That's why we Jews bury our women when they're still alive. It cuts down on the heartbreak." The Romans took off his helmet, ran his hand over his short hair, and flung sweat at me. "Go on, you two. Get your friend into the shade. It's too hot out here for a sick boy. Go on." Maggie and I helped Joshua to his feet and began to lead him away. But when we had gone only a few steps, Joshua stopped and looked back over his shoulder at the Roman. "Will you slay my people if we follow our God?" he shouted. I cuffed him by the back of the head. "Joshua, are you insane?" Justice narrowed his gaze at Joshua, and his smile went out of his eyes. "Whatever they tell you, boy, Rome has only 2 rules. Pay your taxes and don't rebel. Follow those and you'll stay alive." Maggie yanked Joshua around and smiled back at the Roman. "Thank you, sir. We'll get him out of the sun." Then she turned back to Joshua. "Is there something you two would like to tell me?" "It's not me," I said. "It's him." The next day, we met the angel for the first time. Mary and Joseph said that Joshua had left the house at dawn, and they hadn't seen him since. I wandered around the village most of the morning looking for Joshua and hoping to run into Maggie. The square was alive with talk of the walking dead woman, but neither of my friends were to be found. At noon, my mother recruited me to watch my little brothers while she went to work with the other women in the vineyard. She returned at dusk, smelling of sweat and sweet wine. Her feet purple from walking in the wine press. Cut loose, I ran all over the hilltop, checking in on our favorite places to play, and finally found Joshua on his knees in an olive grove, rocking back and forth as he prayed. He was soaked in sweat, and I was afraid he might have a fever. Strange, I never felt that sort of concern for my own brothers, but from the beginning, Joshua filled me with divinely inspired worry. I watched and waited, and when he stopped his rocking and sat back to rest, I faked a cough to let him know I was coming. Maybe you should stick to lizards a little while longer. I failed. I have disappointed my father. Did he tell you that, or do you just know it? He thought for a moment, made as if to brush his hair away from his face, then remembered he no longer wore his hair long, and dropped his hands in his lap. I ask for guidance, but I get no answer. I can feel that I'm supposed to do things, but I don't know what. I don't know how. I don't know, I think the priest was surprised. I certainly was. Maggie was. People will be talking about it for months. But I wanted the woman to live again, to walk among us, to tell of the miracle. Well, it is written, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Where is that written? Dalmatians 9:7, I think. Doesn't matter, no one else could have done what you did. Joshua nodded. What are the people saying? They think it was something the woman used to prepare the corpse. They're still going through purification for 2 more days, so no one can ask them. So they don't know it was me? I hope not, Joshua. Don't you understand that you can't do that sort of thing in front of people? They aren't ready for it. But most of them want it. They talk about the Messiah coming to deliver us all the time. Don't I have to show them that he has come? What do you say to that? He was right. Since I could remember, there was always talk of the coming of the Messiah, of the coming of the kingdom of God, of the liberation of our people from the Romans. The hills were full of different factions of zealots who skirmished with the Romans in hope that they could bring about the change. We were the chosen of God, blessed and punished like no other on earth. When the Jews spoke, God listened. Now it was God's turn to speak. Evidently, my best friend was supposed to be the mouthpiece, but at that moment, I just didn't believe it. Despite what I'd seen, Joshua was my pal, not the Messiah. I said, I'm pretty sure the Messiah is supposed to have a beard. So it's not time yet, is that what you're saying? Right, Josh. I'm going to know when you don't. God sent a messenger to me, and he said, by the way, tell Joshua to wait until he can shave before he leaves my people out of bondage. It could happen. Don't ask me. Ask God. That's what I've been doing. He's not answering. It had been getting darker by the minute in the olive grove, and I could barely see the shine in Joshua's eyes. But suddenly the area around us was lit up like daylight. We looked up to see the dreaded Raziel descending upon us from the treetops. Of course, I didn't know he was the dreaded Raziel at the time. I was just terrified. The angel shone like a star above us. His features were so perfect that even my beloved Maggie's beauty paled by comparison. Joshua hid his face and huddled against the trunk of an olive tree. I guess he was more easily surprised by the supernatural than I was. I just stood there staring with my mouth open, drooling like the village idiot. Fear not, for behold, I bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all men. For on this day in the city of David is born a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. Then he hovered for a second, waiting for his message to sink in. Joshua uncovered his face and risked a glance at the angel. Well, the angel said. It took me a second to digest the meaning of the words, and I waited for Joshua to say something. But he had turned his face skyward and seemed to be basking in the light. A silly smile locked on his face. Finally, I pointed a thumb at Josh and said, he was born in the city of David. Really? Said the angel. Yep. His mother's name is Mary. Yep. She a virgin? Well, he has 4 brothers and sisters now, but at one time, yeah. The angel looked around nervously, as if he might expect a multitude of the heavenly host to show up at some point. How old are you, kid? Joshua just stared, smiling. He's 10. The angel cleared his throat and fidgeted a bit, dropping a few feet towards the ground as he did so. I'm in a lot of trouble. I stopped to chat with Michael on the way here, and he had a deck of cards, and I knew some time had passed, but... To Joshua, he said, Kid, were you born in a stable? Wrapped in swaddling cloths and lying in a manger? Joshua said nothing. That's the way he tells it. Or that's the way his mom tells it, I said. Is he retarded? I think you're his first angel. He's impressed, I think. What about you? Well, I'm in trouble because I'm going to be an hour late for dinner. I see what you mean. I'd better get back and check on this. If you see some shepherds watching over their flocks by night, would you tell them that at some point, probably 10 years or so ago, that a savior was born? Could you do that? Sure. Okie dokie. Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth, goodwill towards men. Right back at you. Thanks, bye. And as quickly he had come, the angel was gone in a shooting star, and the olive grove went dark again. I could just make out Joshua's face as he turned to me. There you go. Next question. I suppose that every boy wonders what he'll be when he grows up. I suppose that many watch their peers accomplish great things and wonder, could I have done that? For me, to know at 10 that my best friend was the Messiah, while I would live and die a stonecutter, seemed too much of a curse for a 10-year-old to bear. The morning after we met the angel, I went to the square and sat with Bartholomew the village idiot, hoping that Maggie would come to the well. If I had to be a stonecutter, at least I might have the love of an enchanting woman. In those days, we started training for our life's work at 10, then received the prayer shawl and phylacteries at 13, signifying our entry into manhood. Soon after, we were expected to be betrothed, and by 14, married and starting a family. So you see, I was not too young to consider Maggie as a wife. And I might always have the fallback position of marrying Joshua's mother when Joseph died. The women would come and go, fetching water, washing clothes, and as the sun rose high and the square cleared, Bartholomew sat in the shade of a tattered date palm and picked his nose. Maggie never appeared. Funny how easy heartbreak can come. I've always had talent for it. "Why you cry?" said Bartholomew. He was bigger than any man in the village. His hair and beard were wild and tangled, and the yellow dust that covered him from head to toe gave him the appearance of an incredibly stupid lion. His tunic was ragged and he wore no sandals. The only thing he owned was a wooden bowl that he ate from and licked clean. He lived off the charity of the village and by gleaning the grain fields. There was always some grain left in the fields for the poor. It was dictated by the law. I never knew how old he was. He spent his days in the square, playing with the village dogs, giggling to himself and scratching his crotch. When the women passed, he would stick out his tongue and say bleh. My women said he had the mind of a child. As usual, she was wrong. He put his big paw on my shoulder and rubbed, leaving a dusty circle of affection on my shirt. "Why you cry?" he asked again. "I'm just sad. You wouldn't understand." Bartholomew looked around, and when he saw we were alone in the square except for his dog pals, he says, "You think too much. Thinking will bring you nothing but suffering. Be simple." What? It was the most coherent thing I've ever heard him say. Do you ever see me cry? I have nothing, so I am slave to nothing. I have nothing to do, so nothing makes me its slave. What do you know? I snapped. You live in the dirt. You are unclean. You do nothing. I have to begin working next week and work for a lifetime until I die with a broken back. The girl I want is in love with my best friend and he's the Messiah. I'm nothing and you're an idiot. No, I'm not. I'm a Greek. A cynic. I turned and really looked at him. His eyes, normally as dull as mud, shone like black jewels in the dusty desert of his face. What's a cynic? A philosopher. I am a student of Diogenes. You know Diogenes? No, but how much could he have taught you? Your only friends are dogs. Diogenes went about Athens with a lamp in broad daylight, holding it in people's faces, saying he was looking for an honest man. So he was like the prophet of the idiots? No. Bart picked up a small terrier and was gesturing with him to make his point. The dog seemed to enjoy it. They were all fooled by their culture. Diogenes taught that all affectations of modern life were false, that a man must live simply, outdoors, carry nothing, make no art, no poetry, no religion. Like a dog. Yes. Described a flourish in the air with the rat dog. Exactly. The little dog made as if to upchuck from the motion. Bart put him down and he wobbled away. A life without worry. Right then it sounded wonderful. I mean, I didn't want to live in the dirt and have other people think me mad like Bartholomew, but a dog's life really didn't sound bad. The idiot had been hiding a deep wisdom all these years. I'm trying to learn to lick my own balls, Bart said. Or maybe not. I have to go find Joshua, I said. You know he is the Messiah, don't you? Wait a minute, you're not a Jew. I thought you didn't believe any religion. The dogs told me he was the Messiah. I believe them. Tell Joshua I believe them. The dogs told you? They're Jewish dogs. Right, let me know how the ball licking works out. Shalom. Who would have thought that Joshua would find his first apostle among the dirt and dogs of Nazareth? Blech. I found Joshua at the synagogue, listening to the Pharisees lecture on the law. I stepped through the group of boys sitting on the floor and whispered to them. Bartholomew says that he knows you are the Messiah. The idiot? Did you ask him how long he's known? He says the village dogs told him. I never thought to ask the dogs. He says that we should live simply, like dogs, carry nothing, no affectations, whatever that means. Bartholomew says that? Sounds like an Essene. He's much smarter than he looks. He's trying to learn to lick his own balls. I'm sure there's something in the law that forbids that. I'll ask the rabbi. I'm not sure you want to bring that up to the Pharisee. Did you tell your father about the angel? No. Good. I've spoken to Joseph, and he's going to let me learn to be a stonecutter with you. I don't want your father to change his mind about teaching me. I think the angel would frighten him. Joshua looked at me for the first time, turning from the Pharisee, who droned on in Hebrew. Have you been crying? Me? No. Bart stench made my eyes water. Joshua put his hand on my forehead, and all the sadness and trepidation seemed to drain out of me in an instant. He smiled. Better? I'm jealous of you and Maggie. That can't be good for your neck. What? Trying to lick your own balls. It's gotta be hard on your neck. Did you hear me? I'm jealous of you and Maggie. I'm still learning, Biff. There are things I don't understand yet. The Lord said, I am a jealous God, so jealous should be a good thing. But it makes me feel so bad. You see the puzzle then. Jealousy makes you feel bad, but God is jealous, so it must be good. Yet when a dog licks its balls, it seems to enjoy it, but it must be bad under the law. Suddenly, Joshua was yanked to his feet by his ear. The Pharisee glared at him. Is the law of Moses too boring for you, Joshua Bar Joseph? I have a question, Rabbi, Joshua said. Oh, geez. I hid my head in my arms. Chapter 4. Yet another reason I loathe the heavenly scum with whom I share this room. Today I found that I had offended our intrepid room service waiter, Jesus. How was I supposed to know? When he brought our pizza for dinner, I gave him one of the American silver coins that we received from the airport sweet shop called Cinnabon. He scoffed at me. Scoffed! Thinking better of it, and he said, Senor, I know you are foreign, so you do not know, but this is a very insulting tip. Better you just sign the room service slip so I get the fee that is added automatically. I tell you this because you have been very kind, and I know you do not mean to offend, but another of the waiters would spit in your food if you should offer him this. I glared at the angel, who as usual was lying on the bed watching television, and for the first time I realized that he did not understand Jesus' language. He did not possess the gift of tongues he had bestowed on me. He spoke Aramaic to me, and he seemed to know Hebrew and English enough to understand television, but of Spanish he understood not a word. I apologized to Jesus and sent him on his way with Jesus, and sent him on his way with a promise that I would make it up to him. Then I wheeled on the angel. You fool! These coins, these dimes, are nearly worthless in this country. What do you mean? They look like the silver dinars we dug up in Jerusalem. They're worth a fortune. He was right in a way. He called me up from the dead. After he called me up from the dead, I led him to a cemetery in the valley of Ben Hedon. And there, hidden behind a stone where Judas had put it 2,000 years ago, was the blood money, 30 silver dinars. But for a little tarnish, they looked just as they did on the day I had taken them, and they were almost identical to the coin this country calls the dime, except for the image of Tiberius on the dinars and some Caesar on the dime. We had taken the dinars to an antiquities dealer in the old city, which looked nearly the same as it did when I last walked there, except that the temple was gone and in its place 2 great mosques. The merchant gave us $20,000 in American money for them. It was this money that we had traveled on, and deposited at the hotel desk for our expenses. The angel told me that the dimes must have the same worth as the dinars, and, like a fool, believed him. You should have told me, I said to the angel. If I could leave this room, I would know myself. You have work to do, the angel said. Then he leapt to his feet and shouted at the television, The wrath of the Lord shall fall upon ye, Stephanos. What in the hell are you yelling at? The angel wagged a finger at the screen. He has exchanged Catherine's baby for its evil twin, which he fathered with her sister while she was in a coma, yet Catherine does not realize his evil deed, as he has had his face changed to impersonate the bank manager, who is foreclosing on Catherine's husband's business. If I was not trapped here, I would personally drag the fiend straight to hell. For days now, the angel had been watching serial dramas on television, alternately shouting at the screen or bursting into tears. He had stopped reading over my shoulder, so I just tried to ignore him, but now I realized what was going on. It's not real, Raziel. What do you mean? It's drama, like the Greeks used to do. They are actors in a play. No one can pretend to such evil. That's not all. Spider-Man and Dr. Octopus? Not real. Characters in a play. Lying dog. If you'd ever leave the room and look at how real people talk, you'd know that, you yellow-haired cretin. But no, you stay here, perched on my shoulder like a trained bird. I am dead 2,000 years, and even I know better. Still need to get a look at that book in the dresser. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could goad the angel into giving me 5 minutes privacy. You know nothing, said Raziel. I've destroyed whole cities in my time. Sort of makes you wonder if you destroyed the right ones. That'd be embarrassing, huh? Then an advertisement came on the screen for a magazine that promised to fill in all the blanks and give the real inside story to all the soap operas. Soap Opera Digest. I watched the angel's eyes widen. He grabbed the phone and rang the front desk. What are you doing? I need that book. Have them send up Jesus. He'll help you get it. On our first day of work, Joshua and I were up before dawn. We met near the well and filled the water skins our father had given us, then ate our breakfast, flatbread and cheese. As we walked together to Sepphoris, the road, although packed dirt most of the way, was smooth and easy to walk. If Rome saw to anything in its territories, it was the lifelines of its army. As we watched the rock-strewn hills turn pink under the rising sun, and I saw Joshua shudder as if a chill wind had danced up his spine. The glory of God is in everything we see. We must never forget that. I just stepped in camel dung. Tomorrow, let's leave after it's light out. I just realized it. That is why the old woman wouldn't live again. I forgot that it wasn't my power that made her arise. It was the Lord's. I brought her back for the wrong reason, out of arrogance, so she died a second time. Squished over the side of my sandal. Well, that's gonna smell all day. But perhaps it was because I did not touch her. When I brought other creatures back to life, I've always touched them. Is there something in the law about taking the camel off-road to do its business? There should be. Not the law of Moses, then the Romans should have one. I mean, they won't hesitate to crucify a Jew who rebels. There should be some punishment for messing up their roads, don't you think? I'm not saying crucifixion, but a good smiting in the mouth or something. But how could I have touched the corpse when it's forbidden by the law? The mourners would have stopped me. Can we stop for a second so I can scrape off my sandal? Help me find a stick. That pile was as big as my head. You're not listening to me, Biff. I am listening. Look, Joshua, I don't think the law applies to you. I mean, you're the Messiah. God's supposed to tell you what he wants, isn't he? I asked, but I received no answer. Look, you're doing fine. Maybe that woman didn't live again because she was stubborn. Old people are that way. You have to throw water on my grandfather to get him up from his nap. Try a young dead person next time. What if I am not really the Messiah? You mean you're not sure? The angel didn't give it away? You think that God might be playing a joke on you? I don't think so. I don't know the Torah as well as you, Joshua, but I remember God having a sense of humor. Finally, a grin. He gave me you as a best friend, didn't he? Help me find a stick. Do you think I'll make a good stonemason? Just don't be better at it than I am, that's all I ask. You stink. What have I been saying? You really think Maggie likes me? Are you going to be like this every morning? Because you are. If you are, you can walk to work alone. The gates of Sepphoris were like a funnel of humanity. Farmers poured out into their fields and groves, craftsmen and builders crowded in, while merchants hawked their wares and beggars moaned at the roadside. Joshua and I stopped outside the gates to marvel and were nearly run down by a man leading a string of donkeys laden with baskets of stone. Wasn't that we never seen a city before? Jerusalem was 50 times larger than Sepphoris, and we had been there many times for feast days. But Jerusalem was a Jewish city. It was the Jewish city. Sepphoris was the Roman fortress city of Galilee, and as soon as we saw the statue of Venus at the gates, we knew something about this was different. I elbowed Joshua in the ribs. Graven image. I had never seen the human form depicted before. Sinful, Joshua said. She's naked. Don't look. She's completely naked. It is forbidden. We should go away from here. Find your father. He caught me by the sleeve and dragged me through the gates into the city. How can they allow that? You think our people would tear it down? They did. A band of zealots. Joseph told me. The Romans caught them and crucified them by this road. You never told me that. Joseph told me not to speak of it. You could see her breasts. Don't think about it. How can I not think about it? I've never seen a breast without a baby attached to it. They're more friendly in pairs like that. Which way to where we're supposed to work? My father said to come to the western corner of the city and we would see where the work was being done. Then come along. He was still dragging me, his head down, stomping along like an angry mule. Do you think Maggie's breasts will look like that? My father had been commissioned to build a house for a wealthy Greek on the western side of the city. When Joshua and I arrived, my father was already there, directing the slaves who were hoisting a cut stone into place on the wall. I suppose I was expecting something different. I suppose I was surprised that anyone, even a slave, would do as my father instructed. The slaves were Nubians, Egyptians, Phoenicians, criminals, debtors, spoils of war, accidents of birth. They were wiry, filthy men. Many wearing nothing more than sandals and a loincloth. In another life, they may have commanded an army or lived in a palace. But now they sweated in the morning chill, moving stones heavy enough to break a donkey. Are these your slaves? Joshua asked my father. Am I a rich man, Joshua? No, these slaves belong to the Romans. The Greek who was building this house has hired them for the construction. Why do they do as you ask? There are so many of them. You are only one man. My father hung his head. I hope that you never see what the lead tips of a Roman whip do to a man's body. All these men have, and even seeing it has broken their spirit as men. I pray for them every night. I hate the Romans, I said. Do you, little one? Do you? A man's voice from behind. Hail, Centurion! My father said, his eyes going wide. Joshua and I turned to see Justus Gallicus, the centurion from the funeral at Jafia, standing among the slaves. Alphaeus, it seems you are raising a litter of zealots. My father put his hands on mine and Joshua's shoulders. This is my son Levi and his friend Joshua. They begin their apprenticeship today. Just boys, he says, by way of apology. Justus approached, looked quickly at me and stared at Joshua for a long time. I know you, boy. I've seen you before. The funeral at Jafia, I said quickly. I couldn't take my eyes off of the wasp-waisted short sword that hung from the centurion's belt. No, the Roman seemed to be searching his memory. Not Jafia. I've seen this face in a picture. That can't be, my father said. We are forbidden by our faith from depicting the human form. Justus glared at him. I am not a stranger to your people's primitive beliefs, Alphaeus. Still, this boy is familiar. Joshua stared up at the centurion with a completely blank expression. You feel for these slaves, boy? You would free them if you could? Joshua nodded. I would. A man's spirit should be his own to give to God. You know, there was a slave about 80 years ago who talked like you. He raised an army of slaves against Rome, beat back 2 of our armies, took over all the territory south of Rome. It's a story every Roman soldier must learn. Why? What happened? I asked. We crucified him by the side of the road, and his body was eaten by ravens. The lesson we all learn is that nothing can stand against Rome. A lesson you need to learn, boy, along with your stone cutting. Just then another Roman soldier approached, a legionnaire, not wearing the cape or the helmet crest of the centurion. He said something to Justus in Latin, then turned to Joshua and paused. In rough Aramaic, he said, Hey, didn't I see that kid on some bread once? Wasn't him, I said. Really? Sure looks like him. Nope, that was another kid on the bread. It was me, said Joshua. I backhanded him across the forehead, knocking him to the ground. No, he wasn't. He's insane. Sorry. The soldier shook his head and hurried off after Justus. I offered a hand to help Joshua up. You're gonna have to learn to lie. I am, but I feel like I'm here to tell the truth. Yeah, sure, but not now. I don't know exactly what I expected it would be like working as a stonemason, but I know that in less than a week, Joshua was having second thoughts about not becoming a carpenter. Cutting great stones with small iron chisels was very hard work. Who knew? Look around. Do you see any trees? Joshua mocked. Rocks, Josh, rocks. It's only hard because we don't know what we're doing. It'll get easier. Joshua looked at my father, who was stripped to the waist, chiseling away at a stone the size of a donkey, while a dozen slaves waited to hoist it into place. He was covered with gray dust, and streams of sweat drew dark lines between cords of muscle straining in his back and arms. Alphaeus, Joshua called. Does the work get easier once you know what you're doing? Your lungs grow thick with stone dust, and your eyes bleary from the sun and fragments thrown up by the chisel. You pour your lifeblood out into works of stone for Romans who will take your money and taxes to feed soldiers who will nail your people to crosses for wanting to be free. Your back breaks, your bone creaks, your wife screeches at you, and your children torment you with open begging mouths, like greedy baby birds in the nest. You go to bed every night so tired and beaten that you pray to the Lord to send the angel of death to take you in your sleep so you don't have to face another morning. It also has its downsides. Thanks, Joshua said. He looked at me, one eyebrow raised. I, for one, am excited, I said. I'm ready to cut some stone. Stand back, Josh. My chisel's on fire. Life is stretched out before us like the great bazaar, and I can't wait to taste the sweets to be found there. Josh tilted his head like a bewildered dog. I didn't get that from your father's answer. It's sarcasm, Josh. Sarcasm? It's from the Greek, sarkasmos, to bite the lip. It means that you aren't really saying what you mean, but people will get your point. I invented it. Bartholomew named it. Well, if the village idiot named it, I'm sure it's a good thing. There you go, you got it. Got what? Sarcasm. No, I meant it. Sure you did. Is that sarcasm? Irony, I think. What's the difference? I haven't the slightest idea. You're being ironic now, right? No, I really don't know. Maybe you should ask the idiot. Now you've got it. What? Sarcasm. Biff, are you sure you weren't sent here by the devil to vex me? Could be. How am I doing so far? You feel vexed? Yep, and my hands hurt from holding the chisel and mallet. He struck the chisel with his wooden mallet and sprayed us both with some stone fragments. Maybe God sent me to talk to you and becoming a stonemason so you would hurry up and go be the Messiah. He struck the chisel again and spit and sputtered through the fragments that flew. I don't know how to be the Messiah. So what, a week ago we didn't know how to be stonemasons, and look at us now. It gets easier once you know what you're doing. Are you being ironic again? God, I hope not. It was 2 months before we actually saw the Greek who had commissioned my father to build the house. He was a short, soft-looking little man who wore a robe that was as white as any worn by the Levite priests, with a border of interlocking rectangles woven around the hem in gold. He arrived in a pair of chariots, followed on foot by 2 body slaves and a half-dozen bodyguards who looked like Phoenicians. I say a pair of chariots because he rode with the driver in a lead chariot, but behind them they pulled a second chariot, in which stood the 10-foot-tall marble statue of a naked man. The Greek climbed down from his chariot and went directly to my father. Joshua and I were mixing a batch of mortar at the time, and we paused to watch. Graven image, Joshua said. Saw it, I said. As graven images go, I like Venus over by the gate better. That statue is definitely not Jewish. Definitely not Jewish, I said. The statue's manhood, although abundant, was not circumcised. Alphaeus, the Greek said, why haven't you set the floor of the gymnasium yet? I brought this statue to display in the gymnasium, and there's just a hole in the ground instead of a gymnasium. I told you, this ground is not suitable for building. I can't build on sand. I've had the slaves dig down in the sand until they hit bedrock. Now it has to be backfilled in with stone, then pounded. But I want to place my statue, the Greek whined. It's come all the way from Athens. Would you rather your house fall down around your precious statue? Don't talk to me that way, Jew. I'm paying you well to build this house. And I'm building this house well, which means not on sand. So store your statue and let me do my work. Well, unload it. You slaves, help unload my statue. The Greek was talking to Joshua and me. All of you, help unload my statue. He pointed to the slaves who had been pretending to work since the Greek arrived, but who weren't sure that it was in their best interest to look like a part of a project that which the master seemed displeased. They all looked up with a surprised "who, me?" expression on their faces, which I noticed was the same in any language. The slaves moved to the chariot and began untying the ropes that held the statue in place. The Greek looked to us. Are you deaf slaves? Help them! He stormed back to his chariot and grabbed a whip out of the driver's hands. Those are not slaves. Those are my apprentices, my father said. The Greek wheeled at him, and I should care about that? Move, boys, now! No, Joshua said. I thought the Greek would explode. He raised his whip as if to strike. What did you say? He said no, I said, stepped up to Joshua's side. My people believe that graven images, statues, are sinful. My father said, his voice on the edge of panic. The boys are only being true to their god. Well, that is a statue of Apollo, a real god, so they will help unload it, as will you, or I'll find another mason to build my house. No, Joshua repeated, we will not. Right, you leprous jar of camel snot, I said. Joshua looked at me, sort of disgusted. Jeez, Biff. Too much? The Greek screeched and started to swing the whip. Last thing I saw as I covered my face with my father diving toward the Greek. I would take a lash for Joshua, but I didn't want to lose an eye. I braced for the sting that never came. There was a thump, then a twinging sound, and when I uncovered my face, the Greek was lying on his back in the dirt, his white robe covered with dust, his face red with rage. The whip was extended out behind him, and on its tip stood the armored hobtail boot of Gaius Justus Gallicus, the centurion. The Greek rolled in the dirt, ready to vent his ire on whoever had stayed his hand, but when he saw who it was, he went limp and pretended to cough. One of the Greek's bodyguards started to step forward. Justus pointed a finger at the guard. Will you stand down, or will you rather feel the foot of the Roman Empire on your neck? The guard stepped back into line with his companion. The Roman was grinning like a mule eating an apple, not in the least concerned with allowing the Greek to save face. So, Castor, am I to gather that you need to conscript more Roman slaves to help build your house? Or is it true what I hear about you Greeks, that whipping young boys is an entertainment for you, not a disciplinary action? The Greek spit out a mouthful of dust as he climbed to his feet. The slaves I have will be sufficient for the task, won't they, Alphaeus? He turned to my father, his eyes pleading. My father seemed to be caught between two evils, and unable to decide which was the lesser of them. Probably, he said finally. Well then, good, Justice said. I will expect a bonus payment for the extra work they are doing. Carry on. Justice walked through the construction site, acting as if every eye was not on him, or not caring, and paused as he passed Joshua and me. Leprous jar of camel snot, he said under his breath. Old Hebrew blessing, I ventured. You two should be in the hills with the other Hebrew rebels. The Roman laughed, tousled our hair, and walked away. The sunset was turning to the hillside's ping as we walked home to Nazareth that evening. In addition to being almost exhausted from the work, Joshua seemed vexed by the events of the day. Did you know that, about not being able to build on sand, he asked. Of course, my father's been talking about it for a long time. You can build on sand, but what you build will fall down. Joshua nodded thoughtfully. What about soil? Dirt? Is it okay to build on that? Rock is best, but I suppose hard dirt is good. I need to remember that. We seldom saw Maggie in those days after we began working with my father. I found myself looking forward to the Sabbath, where we would go to the synagogue and I would mill around outside among the women while the men were inside listening to the reading of the Torah, the arguments of the Pharisees. It was one of the few times I could talk to Maggie without Joshua around. For though he resented the Pharisees even then, he knew he could learn from them, so he spent his Sabbath listening to their teachings. I still wonder if this time I stole with Maggie somehow represented a disloyalty to Joshua. But later when I asked him about it, he said, God is willing to forgive you the sin that you carry for being a child of man, but you must forgive yourself for having once been a child. I suppose that's right. Of course it's right. I'm the son of God, you dolt. Besides, Maggie always wanted to talk about me anyway, didn't she? Not always, I lied. On the Sabbath before the murder, I found Maggie outside the synagogue, sitting by herself under a date palm tree. I shuffled up to her to talk, but kept looking at my feet. I knew that if I looked into her eyes, I would forget what I was talking about, so I only looked at her in brief takes, the way a man would glance up at the sun on a sweltering day to confirm the source of the heat. Where's Joshua? Were the first words out of her mouth, of course. Studying with the men. She seemed disappointed for a moment, then brightened. How was your work? Hard. I like playing better. What is Sepphoris like? Is it like Jerusalem? No, it's smaller, but there are a lot of Romans there. She'd seen Romans. I needed something to impress her. And there are graven images, statues of people. Maggie covered her mouth to stifle a giggle. Statues, really? I would love to see them. Then come with us. We're leaving tomorrow very early before anyone's awake. I couldn't. What would I tell my mother I was going? Tell her you're going to Sepphoris with the Messiah and his pal. Her eyes went wide, and I quickly looked away before I was caught in their spell. You shouldn't talk that way, Biff. I saw the angel. You said yourself that we shouldn't say it. I was only joking. Tell your mother I told you about a beehive that I found, and you wanted to go find some honey while the bees are still groggy from the morning cold. It's a full moon today, so you'll be able to see. She might just believe you. She might, but she'll know I was lying when I don't bring home any honey. Tell her it was a hornet's nest. She thinks Josh and I are stupid anyway, doesn't she? She thinks that Joshua is touched in the head, but you, yes, she thinks you're stupid. You see, my plan is working, for it is written that if a wise man always appears stupid, his failures do not disappoint, and his success gives pleasant surprise. Maggie smacked me on the leg. That's not written. Sure it is. Imbeciles 3, verse 7. There is no book of imbeciles. Grudges 4 or 5? You're making that up. Come with us. You can be back to Nazareth before it's time to fetch the morning water. Why so early? What are you two up to? We're going to circumcise Apollo. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me as if she would see liar written across my forehead in fire. Wasn't my idea, I said. It was Joshua's. I'll go then. Chapter 5. Well, it worked. I finally got the angel to leave the room. It went like this. Razio called down to the front desk and asked him to send Jesus up. Jesus up. A few minutes later, our Latin pal stood at attention at the foot of the angel's bed. Raziel said, tell him I need a soap opera digest. In Spanish, I said, good afternoon, Jesus. How are you, sir, today? I am well, sir. And you? As good as can be expected, considering this man is holding me prisoner. Tell him to hurry, said Raziel. He doesn't understand Spanish, Jesus asked. Not a word of it, but don't start speaking Hebrew or I'm sunk. Are you really a prisoner? I wondered why you two never left the room. Shall I call the police? No, that won't be necessary, but please shake your head and look apologetic. What is taking so long, Raziel said. Give him the money and tell him to go. He said he's not allowed to buy publications for you, but he can direct you to a place where you can purchase them yourselves. That's ridiculous. He's a servant, isn't he? He will do as I ask. Oh my, Jesus. He has just asked if you would like to feel the power of his manly nakedness. Is he crazy? I have a wife and 2 children. Sadly, yes, but please show him that you are offended by his offer, by spitting on him and storming out of the room. I don't know, sir. Spitting on a guest? I handed him a handful of the bills that he taught me were appropriate gratuities. Please, it would be good for him. Very well, Mr. Biff. He produced an impressive loogie and launched it at the front of the angel's robe, where it splattered and ran. Raziel leapt to his feet. Well done, Jesus. Now curse. You little fuckstick. In Spanish. Sorry, I was showing off my English. I know many swear words. Well done. Spanish, please. Pendejo. Splendid. Now storm out. Jesus turned on his heel and left the room, slamming the door behind him. He spit on me, Raziel said, still not believing it. An angel of the Lord, and he spit on me. Yes, you offended him. He called me a fuckstick. I heard him. In his culture, is it an affront to ask another man to buy a soap opera digest for you? We'll be lucky if he ever brings us a pizza again. But I want a soap opera digest. He said you could buy one just down the street. I will be happy to go get one for you. Not so fast, Apostle. None of your tricks. I'll get it myself. You stay here. You'll need money. I handed him some bills. If you leave the room, I will find you in an instant. You know that? Absolutely. You cannot hide from me. Wouldn't dream of it. Hurry now. He sort of shuffled sideways towards the door. Don't try to lock me out. I'm taking a key with me. Not that I need it or anything, being an angel of the Lord. Not to mention a fuckstick. I don't even know what that means. Go, go, go. I shoot him through the door. Godspeed, Raziel. Work on your gospel while I'm gone. Right. I slammed the door in his face and threw the safety lock. Raziel has now watched hundreds of hours of American television. You'd think he'd notice that people wear shoes when they go outside. The book is exactly as I expected. A Bible, but written in a flowery version of the English I've been writing in. The translation of the Torah and the prophets from the Hebrew is muddled sometimes, but the first part seems to be our Bible. This language is amazing, so many words. In my time, we had very few words, perhaps 100 that we used all the time, and 30 of them were synonyms for guilt. In this language, you can curse for an hour and never use the same word twice. Blocks and schools and herds of words. That's why I'm supposed to use this language to tell Joshua's story. I've hidden the book in the bathroom so I can sneak in and read it while the angel's in the room. I didn't actually have time to read much of the part of the book what they call the New Testament, but it's obvious that it's the story of Joshua's life, or parts of it anyway. I'll study it later, but for now I should go on with the real story. I suppose I should have considered the exact nature of what we were doing before I invited Maggie to join us. I mean, there is some difference between the circumcision of an 8-day-old baby boy, which she had seen before, and the same operation on a 10-foot statue of a Greek god. My goodness, that is impressive, she said, staring up at the marble member. Graven image, Joshua said under his breath. Even in the moonlight, I could tell he was blushing. Let's do it. I pulled a small iron chisel from my pouch. Joshua was wrapping the head of his mallet with leather to deaden the sound. Sephora slept around us, the silence broken only by the occasional bleat of sheep. The evening cook fires had long since gone to coals, the dust cloud that stirred through the city during the day had settled, and the night air was clean and still. From time to time I would catch a sweet whiff of sandalwood coming from Maggie, and I would lose my train of thought. Funny the things you remember. I found a bucket and turned it upside down for Joshua to stand on while he worked. He set the tip of my chisel on Apollo's foreskin and ventured a light tap with the mallet. A tiny fragment of marble flaked away. Give it a good whack, I said. I can't, it'll make too much noise. No, it won't, the leather will cover it. But it might take the whole end of it off. You can spare it, Maggie said. We both quickly turned to her with our mouths hanging open. Probably, she quickly added. I'm only guessing, what do I know? I'm just a girl. Do you guys smell something? We smelled the Romans before we heard them. Heard them before we saw them. The Romans covered themselves with olive oil before they bathed. So if the wind was right or if it was an especially hot day, you could smell a Roman coming at 30 paces. Between the olive oil they bathed with and the garlic and dried paste of anchovies they ate with their barley, when the legions marched into battle, it must have smelled like an invasion of pizza people. If they had pizza back then, which they didn't. Joshua took a quick swipe with the mallet and the chisel slipped, neatly severing Apollo's unit, which fell to the dirt with a dull thud. Oops, said the Savior. Shh, I said. We heard the hobnails of the Roman boots scraping on stone. Joshua jumped down from the bucket and looked frantically for a place to hide. The walls of the great bathhouse were almost completed around the statue, so really, except for the entrance where the Roman was coming, there was nowhere to run. Hey, what are you doing there? We stood as still as the statue. I could see that it was the legionnaire that had been with Justice our first day in Sepphoris. Sir, it's us, Biff and Joshua, remember? The kid from the bread? The soldier moved closer, his hand on the haft of his half-drawn short sword. When he saw Joshua, he relaxed a bit. What are you doing here so early? No one is to be about at this hour. Suddenly, the soldier was yanked backwards off his feet, and a dark figure fell on him, thrusting a blade into his chest over and over. Maggie screamed, and the figure turned to us. I started to run. Stop! The murderer hissed. I froze. Maggie threw her arms around me and hid her face in my shirt as I trembled. A gurgling sound came from the soldier, but he lay still. Joshua made to step toward the murderer, and I threw an arm across his chest to stop him. That was wrong, Joshua said, almost in tears. You were wrong to kill that man. The murderer held his bloody blade up by his face and grinned at us. Is it not written that Moses became a prophet only by killing an Egyptian slave driver? No master but God. Sakari, I said. Yes, boy, Sakari. Only when the Romans are dead will the Messiah come to set us free. I serve God by killing this tyrant. You serve evil, Joshua said. The Messiah didn't call for the blood of this Roman. The assassin raised his blade and came at Joshua. Maggie and I leapt back, but Joshua stood his ground. The assassin grabbed him by the front of his shirt and pulled him close. What do you know of it, boy? We could clearly see the murderer's face in the moonlight. Maggie gasps. Jeremiah! His eyes went wide, with fear or recognition, I don't know which. He released Joshua and made as if to grab Maggie, and I pulled her away. Mary? The anger had left his voice. Little Mary? Maggie said nothing, but I could feel her shoulders heave as she began to sob. Tell no one of this, the murderer said, now talking as if he were in a trance. He backed away and stood beside the dead soldier. No master but God, he said. Then he turned and ran into the night. Joshua put his hand on Maggie's head and she immediately stopped crying. Jeremiah is my father's brother, she said. Before I go on, you should know about the Sakari, and to know about them you have to know about the Herod, so here you go. About the time that Joshua and I were meeting for the first time, King Herod the Great died after ruling Israel under the Romans for over 40 years. It was in fact the death of Herod that prompted Joseph to bring his family back to Nazareth from Egypt, but that's another story. Now you need to know about Herod. Herod wasn't called the Great because he was a beloved ruler. Herod the Great was in fact a fat, paranoid, pox-ridden tyrant who murdered thousands of Jews, including his own wife and many of his sons. Herod was called the Great because he built things, amazing things, fortresses, palaces, theaters, harbors, a whole city, Caesarea, modeled on the Roman ideal of what a city should be. The one thing he did for the Jewish people who hated him was to rebuild the Temple of Solomon on Mount Moriah at the center of our faith. When Herod the Great died, Rome divided his kingdom among three of his sons, Archelaus, Herod Philippe, and Herod Antipas. It was Antipas who ultimately passed sentence on John the Baptist and gave Joshua over to Pilate. Antipas, you sniveling fuckstick. If only we had the word back then. It was Antipas whose toady pandering to the Romans caused bands of Jewish rebels to rise up in the hills by the hundreds. The Romans called all these rebels zealots, as if they were all united in method as well as cause, but in fact they were as fragmented as Jews of the villages. One of the bands that rose in Galilee called themselves the Sakari. They showed their disapproval of Roman rule by the assassination of Roman soldiers and officials. Although certainly not the largest group of zealots by number, they were the most conspicuous of their actions. No one knew where they came from, and no one knew where they went to after they killed, but every time they struck, the Romans did their best to make our lives hell to get us to give the killers up. And when the Romans caught a zealot, they didn't just crucify the leader of the band, they crucified the whole band, their families, and anyone suspected of helping them. More than once, we saw the road out of Sepphoris lined with crosses and corpses. My people. We ran through the sleeping city, stopping only after we passed through the Venus Gate, where we fell in a heap on the ground, gasping. We have to take Maggie home and get back here for work, Joshua said. You can stay here, I can go by myself. No, we have to go. Joshua held his arms out to his sides, and we saw the bloody handprints the killer had left on his shirt. I have to clean this before somebody sees it. Can't you just make it go away? Maggie asked. It's just a stain. I think the Messiah could get a stain out. Be nice. He's not that good at Messiah stuff yet. It was your uncle after all. Maggie jumped to his feet. You were the ones who wanted to do this stupid thing. Stop, Joshua said, holding his hand up as if he was sprinkling us with silence. If Maggie hadn't been with us, we might be dead now. We may still not be safe when the Sicarii realize that 3 witnesses live. An hour later, Maggie was home safe, and Joshua emerged from the ritual bath outside the synagogue, his clothes soaked and rivulets running out of his hair. Many of us had these mikvahs outside of our homes, and there were hundreds outside the temple in Jerusalem. Stone pits with steps leading down both sides into the water, so one might walk in over one's head on one side, then out the other after a ritual cleansing was done. According to the law, any contact with blood called for a cleansing. Joshua thought it would be a good opportunity to scrub the stain out of his shirt as well. Cold. Joshua was shivering and hopping from foot to foot as if on hot coals. Very cold. There was a small stone hut built over the path, so they never got the direct light of the sun. Consequently, they never warmed up. Evaporation in the dry Galilee air chilled the water even more. Maybe you should come to my house. My mother will have a breakfast fire going by now. You can warm yourself. He wrung the tail out of his shirt and water cascaded down his legs. How would I explain this? You sinned, had an emergency cleansing to do. Sin at dawn? What sin could I have done before dawn? Sin of Onan? I said. Joshua's eyes went wide. Have you committed the sin of Onan? No, but I'm looking forward to it. You can't tell your mother I committed the sin of Onan. I haven't. You could if you're fast. I'll suffer the cold, Joshua said. The good old sin of Onan. It brings back memories. Sin of Onan, spilling the old seed on the ground, cuffing the camel, dusting the donkey, flogging the Pharisee. Onanism, a sin that requires hundreds of hours of practice to get right, or at least that's what I told myself. God slew Onan for spilling his seed on the ground. Onan's seed, not God's. God's seed actually turned out to be my best pal. Imagine the trouble you'd be in if you actually spilled God's seed. Try explaining that. According to the law, if you had any contact with nocturnal emissions, which are not what come out of your tailpipe at night, we didn't have cars back then. You had to purify yourself by baptism, and you weren't allowed to be around people until the next day. Around the age of 13, I spent a lot of time in and out of our mikvah, but I fudged on the solitary part of penance. I mean, not like that was going to help the problem. Many a morning, I was still dripping and shivering from the bath when I met Joshua to go to work. Spilled your seed upon the ground again, he'd ask. Yep. You're unclean, you know. Yeah, I'm getting all wrinkly from purifying myself. You could stop. I tried. I think I'm being vexed by a demon. I could try to heal you. No way, Josh. I'm having enough trouble with laying on of my own hands. You don't want me to cast out your demons? I thought I'd try to exhaust them first. I could tell the scribes and they would have you stoned. Always trying to be helpful, Josh was. That would probably work, but it's written that when the oil of the lamp is used up, the wanker shall light his own way to salvation. That is not written. It is, too, in Isaiah. It is not. You need to study your prophets, Josh. How are you going to be the Messiah if you don't know your prophets? Joshua hung his head. You are right, of course. I clapped him on the shoulder. You'll have time to learn the prophets. Let's cut through the square and see if there are any girls gathering water. Of course it was Maggie I was looking for. It was always Maggie. By the time we got back to Sepphoris, the sun was well up, but the stream of merchants and farmers that normally poured through the Venus Gate was not there. Roman soldiers were stopping and searching everyone who was trying to leave the city, sending them back the way they came. A group of men and women were waiting outside the gate to go in, my father and some of his helpers among them. Levy, my father called. He ran to us and herded us to the side of the road. What's going on? I asked, trying to look innocent. A Roman soldier was murdered last night. There will be no work today. Now you both go home and stay there. Tell your mothers to keep the children in today. If the Romans don't find the killer, there'll be soldiers in Nazareth before noon. Where's Joseph? Joshua asked. My father put his arm around Joshua's shoulder. He's been arrested. He must have come to work very early. They found him at first light near the body of the dead soldier. I only know what had been shouted from inside the gate. The Romans aren't letting anyone in or out of the city. Joshua, tell your mother not to worry. Joseph is a good man. The Lord will protect him. Besides, if the Roman thought he was the killer, he would have been tried already. Joshua backed away from my father in stiff, stumbling steps. He stared straight ahead, but obviously saw nothing. Take him home, Biff. I'll be along as soon as I can. I'm going to try to find out what they've done with Joseph. I nodded and led Joseph away by the shoulders. When we were a few steps down the road, he said, Joseph came looking for me. He was working on the other side of the city. The only reason he was near the Greek's house is that he was looking for me. We'll tell the centurion we saw who killed the soldier. He'll believe me. And if he believes it was Sakari, what will happen to Maggie and her family? I didn't know what to say. Joshua was right and my father was wrong. Joseph was not fine. The Romans would be questioning him right now, maybe torturing him to find out who his accomplices were. That he didn't know anything would not save him, and the testimony from his son not only wouldn't save him, but would send more people to the cross to join him. Jewish blood was going to be spilled one way or another after this. Joshua shook off my hands and ran off the road into an olive grove. I started to follow, but he suddenly spun on me, and the fury of his gaze stopped me in mid-stride. Wait, I need to talk to my father. I waited by the road for nearly an hour. When Joshua walked out of the olive grove, he looked as if a shadow had fallen permanently on his face. I'm lost. I pointed over my shoulder. Nazareth that way, so Forest the other way. You're in the middle. Feel better? You know what I mean. No help from your father, then? I always felt strange asking about Joshua's prayers. You had to see him pray, especially in those days, before we had traveled. There was a lot of strain and trembling, like someone trying to force a fever to break by sheer will. There was no peace in it. I am alone, Joshua said. I punched him in the arm hard. But you didn't feel that. Ow, what'd you do that for? Sorry, no one around to answer you. You're so alone. I am alone. I wound up for a full-body, powered roundhouse punch. Then you wouldn't mind if I smite the bejesus out of you. He threw up his hands and jumped back. No, don't. So you're not alone? I guess not. Good, then wait here. I'm gonna go talk to your father myself. I tramped off into the olive grove. You don't have to go in there to talk to him. He's everywhere. Yeah, right, like you know. If he's everywhere, then how are you alone? Good point. I left Joshua standing by the road and went off to pray. And thus did I pray. Heavenly Father, God of my father and my father's father, God of Abraham and Isaac, God of Moses, who did lead our people out of Egypt, God of David and Solomon, well, you know who you are. Heavenly Father, far be it from me to question your judgment, being as you are all-powerful, and the God of Moses and all of the above. But what exactly are you trying to do to this poor kid? I mean, he's your son, right? He's the Messiah, right? Are you pulling one of those Abraham faith test things on him? In case you didn't notice, he's in quite a pickle here, having witnessed a murder and his stepfather under arrest by the Romans. And in all likelihood, a lot of our people who you have mentioned on more than one occasion are your favorites and the chosen, and of which I am one too, by the way, are going to be tortured and killed unless he does something. So what I'm saying is, could you, much as you did with Samson when he was backed in the corner, weaponless against the Philistines, throw the kid a bone here? With all due respect, your friend Biff. Amen. I was never very good at prayer. Storytelling I'm fine with. In fact, I am the originator of a universal story that I know has survived to this time because I heard it on TV. It begins, 2 Jews walk into a bar. Those 2 Jews? Me and Josh. No kidding. Anyway, I'm not very good at prayer, but before you think I was a little rough on God, there's another thing you need to know about my people. Our relationship with God is different from other people and their gods. Sure, there was fear and sacrifice and all, but essentially, we didn't go to him. He came to us. He told us we were the chosen. He told us he would help us multiply the ends of the earth. He told us he would give us a land of milk and honey. We didn't go to him. We didn't ask. And since he came to us, we figure we can hold him responsible for what he does and what happens to us. For it is written that he who can walk away controls the deal. And if there's anything you learn from reading the Bible, it's that my people walked away a lot. You couldn't turn around that we weren't off in Babylon, worshipping false gods, building false altars, or sleeping with unsuitable women, although the latter might be more of a guy thing than a Jewish thing. And God pretty much didn't mind throwing us into slavery or simply massacring us when we did that. We have that kind of relationship with God. We're family. So I'm not a prayer master, so to speak, but that particular prayer couldn't have been that bad because God answered. Well, he left me a message anyway. As I emerged from the olive grove, Joshua held out his hand and said, God left a message. It's a lizard, I said. Joshua was holding a small lizard in his outstretched hand. Yes, that's the message, don't you see? How was I to know what's going on? Joshua's never lied to me. Never. So if he said that this lizard was a message from God, who was I to dispute him? I fell to my knees and bowed my head under Joshua's outstretched hand. Lord, have mercy on me. I was expecting a burning bush or something. Sorry, really. Then to Josh I said, I'm not so sure you should take that seriously, Josh. Reptiles don't tend to have a great record for getting the message right. Like, for instance, let's see, the Adam and Eve thing. It's not that kind of message, Biff. My father hasn't spoken in words, but the message is as clear as if his voice had come down from the heavens. I knew that. Stood up. And the message is? In my mind, when you had been gone only a few minutes, this lizard ran up my leg and perched on my hand. I realized that it was my father giving me the solution to our problems. And the message is... You remember when we were little, the game we used to play with the lizards? Sure I do. But the message is... You remember how I was able to bring him back to life? A great trick, Josh, but getting back to the message? Don't you see? If the soldier isn't dead, then there was no murder. If there was no murder, then there's no reason for the Romans to harm Joseph. So all we have to do is see to it that the soldier is not dead. Simple. Of course, simple. I studied the lizard for a moment, looking at it from a lot of different angles. It was brownish green and seemed quite content to sit there on Joshua's palm. Ask him what we're supposed to do now. Chapter 6. When we got back to Nazareth, we expected to find Joshua's mother hysterical with worry. But on the contrary, she had gathered Joshua's brothers and sisters outside of their houses, lined them up, and was washing their faces and hands, as if preparing them for the Sabbath meal. Joshua, help me get the little ones ready. We're all going to Sepphoris. Joshua was shocked. We are? The whole village is going to ask the Romans to release Joseph. James was the only one of the children who seemed to understand what had happened to their father. There were tears tracks on his cheeks. I put my arm around his shoulders. He'll be fine. Your father's strong. They'll have to torture him for days before he gives up the ghost. I smiled encouragingly. James broke out of my embrace and ran into the house crying. Mary turned and glared at me. Shouldn't you be with your family, Biff? Oh, my breaking heart, my bruised ego. Even though Mary had taken position as my emergency backup wife, I was crestfallen at her disapproval. And to my credit, not once during that time of trouble did I wish harm to come to Joseph. Not once. After all, I was still too young to take a wife, and some creepy elder would swoop Mary up before I had a chance to rescue her, if Joseph died before I was 14. Why don't you go get Maggie, Joshua suggested, taking only a second from his mission of scrubbing the skin off his brother Judah's face. His father will want to go with us. Or her fathers want to go with us. Sure, I said, and I scampered off to the blacksmith shop in search of approval from my primary wife-to-be. When I arrived, Maggie was sitting outside of her father's shop with her brothers and sisters. She looked as frightened as she had when we first witnessed the murder. I wanted to throw my arms around her to comfort her. We have a plan. I mean, Joshua has a plan. Are you going to go into Sepphoris with everyone else? The whole family. My father has made nails for Joseph. They're friends. She tossed her head, pointing towards the open shed that housed her father's forge. Two men were working over the forge. Go ahead, Biff. You and Joshua go on ahead. We'll be along later. She started waving me away and mouthing words silent to me, which I didn't pick up. What are you saying? What? What? And who's your friend, Maggie? A man's voice coming from near the forge. I looked over and suddenly realized what Maggie had been trying to tell me. Uncle Jeremiah, this is Levi Bar Alphaeus. We call him Biff. He has to go now. Started backing away from the killer. Yes, I have to go. I looked at Maggie, not knowing what to do. I have to... We'll see you in Sepphoris, Maggie said. Right, I said, and then I turned and dashed away, feeling more like a coward than I ever have in my life. When we got back to Sepphoris, there was a large gathering of Jews, perhaps 200, outside of the city walls. Most I recognized as being from Nazareth. No mob mentality, more fearful gathering. More than half of those gathered here were women and children. In the middle of the crowd, a contingent of a dozen Roman soldiers pushed back the onlookers while two slaves dug a grave. Like my own people, the Romans did not dally with their dead. Unless there was a battle ongoing, Roman soldiers were often put in the ground before their corpses were cold. Joshua and I spotted Maggie standing between her father and her murderous uncle at the edge of the crowd. Joshua took off towards her. I followed, but before I got close, Joshua had taken Maggie's hand and dragged her into the midst of the crowd. I could see Maggie trying to follow them. I dove into the mass and crawled under people's feet until I came upon a pair of hobnail boots, which indicated the lower end of a Roman soldier. The other end, equally Roman, was scowling at me. I stood up. Semper Fido, I said in my best Latin, followed by my most charming smile. The soldier scoured further. Suddenly there was a smell of flowers in my nose, and sweet warm lips brushed my ear. I think you just said always dog, Maggie whispered. That would be why he's looking so unpleasant then? I said out the side of my charming smile. In my other ear, another familiar, if not so sweet, whisper. Sing, Biff. Remember the plan, Joshua said. Right, and so I let loose with one of my favorite dirges. La la la, hey Roman guy, too bad about your getting stabbed. La la la, it's probably not a message from God or nothing. La la la, telling that maybe you should have gone home instead of oppressing the chosen people who God himself, his own self, had said that he likes better than you. La la la. The soldier didn't speak Aramaic, so the lyrics didn't move him as I had hoped. But I think the hypnotic toe tappiness of the melody was starting to get to him. I plunged into my second verse. La la la, didn't we tell you that you shouldn't eat pork? La la, although looking at wounds in your chest, the dietary change may not have made that big of a difference. Boom shakalaka laka, boom shakalaka. Come on, you know the words. Enough! The soldier was yanked aside, and Gaius Justus Gallicus stood before us, flanked by two of his officers. Behind him, stretched out on the ground, was the body of the dead soldier. Well done, Biff, Joshua whispered. We're offering our services as professional mourners, I said with a grin, which the centurion was eager not to return. A soldier doesn't need mourners, he has avengers. A voice from the crowd. See here, centurion! Release Joseph of Nazareth, he is no murderer. Justice turned and the crowd parted, leaving a path between him and the man who had spoken up. It was Iban the Pharisee, standing with several other Pharisees from Nazareth. Would you take his place? Justice asked. The Pharisee backed away, his resolve melting quickly under the threat. Well, Justice stepped forward and the crowd parted around him. You speak for your people, Pharisee. Tell them to give me a killer. Or would you rather I crucify Jews until I get the right one? Iban was flustered now and began jabbering a mishmash of verses from the Torah. I looked around and saw Maggie's uncle Jeremiah standing only a few paces from me. When I caught his eye, he slipped his hand under his shirt. To the haft of a knife, I had no doubt. Joseph didn't kill that soldier, Joshua shouted. Justice turned to him and the Pharisees took the opportunity to scramble to the back of the crowd. I know that, Justice said. You do? Of course, boy. No carpenter killed that soldier. How do you know that? I asked. Justice motioned to one of his legionnaires, and his soldier came forward carrying a small basket. The centurion nodded, and the soldier upended the basket. The stone effigy of Apollo's severed penis thudded to the ground in front of us. Uh-oh, I said. Because it was a stone cutter, Justice said. My, that is impressive, Maggie said. I noticed that Joshua was edging toward the body of the soldier. I needed to distract Justice. Aha, I said. Someone beat the soldier to death with a stone willy. Obviously the work of a Greek or a Samaritan. No Jew would touch such a thing. They wouldn't? Maggie asked. Jeez, Maggie. I think you have something to tell me, boy, Justice said. Joshua had laid hands on the dead soldier. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. I wonder where Jeremiah was now. Was he behind me, ready to silence me with a knife, or had he made his escape? Either way, I couldn't say a word. The Sicarii did not work alone. If I gave up Jeremiah, I'd be dead by a Sicarii dagger before the Sabbath. He can't tell you, Centurion, even if he knew, said Joshua, who had moved back to Maggie's side. For it is written in our holy books that no Jew shall rat out another Jew, regardless of what a weasel one or the other shall be. Is that written? Maggie whispered. It is now, Joshua whispered back. Did you just call me a weasel? Behold, a woman at the front of the crowd was pointing to the dead soldier. Another screamed. The corpse was moving. Justice turned toward the commotion, and I took the opportunity to look around for Jeremiah. He was still there behind me, only a few people back, but he was staring gape-jawed at the dead soldier, who was currently standing up and dusting off his tunic. Joshua was trembling intently on the soldier, but there was none of the sweating or trembling that we had seen at the funeral in Jafia. To his credit, Justice, although he seemed frightened at first, stood his ground as the corpse ambled stiff-legged toward him. The other soldiers were backing away, along with all the Jews except Maggie, Joshua, and me. I need to report an attack, sir, the once dead soldier said, performing a very jerky Roman salute. You're dead, Justice said. Am not. You have knife wounds all over your chest. The soldier looked down, touched his wounds gingerly, then looked back at his commander. Seems I have been nicked, sir. Nicked? Nicked? You've been stabbed half a dozen times. You're dead as dirt. I don't think so, sir. Look, I'm not even bleeding. It's because you bled out, son. You're dead. The soldier began to stagger now, started to fall, then caught himself. I am feeling a little woozy. I was attacked last night, sir, near where they were building that Greek's house. There, he was there, he pointed to me. And him too, he pointed to Joshua. And the little girl. These boys attacked you? I could hear scuffling behind me. No, not them. That man over there, the soldier pointed to Jeremiah, who looked around like a trapped animal. Everyone was so intent on watching the miracle of the talking corpse that they had frozen in place. The killer couldn't push his way through the crowds to get away. Arrest him, Justice commanded, but his soldiers were equally stunned by the resurrection of their cohort. Now that I think about it, the dead soldier said, I do remember being stabbed. No outlet from the crowd, Jeremiah turned toward his accuser and drew a blade from under his shirt. This seemed to snap the other soldiers out of their trance, and they began advancing on the killer from different angles, swords drawn. At the sight of the blade, everyone had moved away from the killers, leaving him isolated with no path open but towards us. No master but God, he shouted. Then 3 quick steps and he leapt towards us, his knife raised. I dove on top of Maggie and Joshua, hoping to shield them. But even as I waited for the sharp pain between my shoulder blades, I heard the killer scream, then a grunt, then a protracted moan that ran out of air with a pathetic squeal. I rolled over to see Gaius Justus Gallicus with his short sword sunk to the hilt in the solar plexus of Jeremiah. The killer had dropped his knife and was standing there looking at the Roman sword hand, looking somewhat offended by it. He sank to his knees. Justus yanked his sword free, then wiped the blade on Jeremiah's shirt before stepping back and letting the killer fall forward. That was him, the dead soldier said. Bastard killed me. He fell forward next to his killer and lay still. Much better than last time, Josh, I said. Yeah, much better. Walking and talking. You had him going, said Maggie. I felt good, confident, but it was a team effort, Joshua said. I couldn't have done it without everyone giving it their all, including God. I felt something sharp against my cheek. With the tip of his sword, Justus guided my gaze to the Apollo's stone penis, which lay in the dirt next to the 2 corpses. And do you want to explain how that happened? The pox, I ventured. The pox can do that, Maggie said. Can rot it right off. How do you know that? Joshua asked her. Just guessing. I'm sure glad that's all over. Justus let his sword fall to his side with a sigh. Go home, all of you, by order of Gaius Justus Gallicus, under commander of the 6th Legion, commander of the 3rd and 4th centuries, under authority of Emperor Tiberius and the Roman Empire. You're all commanded to go home and perpetrate no weird shit until I've gotten well drunk and have several days to sleep it off. So you're gonna release Joseph? Maggie asked. He's at the barracks. Go get him and take him home. Amen, said Joshua. Semper Fido, I added in Latin. Joshua's little brother Judah, who was 7 by then, ran around the Roman barracks screaming, "Let my people go! Let my people go!" until he was hoarse. Judah had decided early on that he was going to be Moses when he grew up, only this time Moses would get to enter the Promised Land, on a pony. As it turned out, Joseph had been waiting for us at the Venus Gate. He looked a little confused but otherwise unharmed. They say that a dead man spoke, Joseph said. Mary was ecstatic. Yes, and walked. He pointed out his murderer, then he died again. Sorry, Joshua asked. I tried to make him live on, but it only lasted a minute. Joseph frowned. Did everyone see what you did, Joshua? They didn't know it was my doing, but they saw it. I distracted everyone with one of my excellent dirges, I said. You can't risk yourself like that, Joseph said to Joshua. It's not the time yet. If not to save my father, when? I'm not your father, Joseph smiled. Yes, you are, Joshua hung his head. But I'm not the boss of you, Joseph smiled wide into a grin. Oh, I guess not, Joshua said. You needed to have worried, Joseph. If the Romans had killed you, I was taking good care of Mary and the children. Maggie punched me in the arm. Good to know, Joseph said. On the road to Nazareth, I got to walk with Maggie a few paces behind Joseph and his family. Maggie's family was so distraught over what had happened to Jeremiah, they didn't even notice she wasn't with them. He's much stronger than he was the last time, Maggie said. Don't worry, he'll be a mess tomorrow. Oh, what did I do wrong? Oh, my faith wasn't strong enough. I'm not worthy of my task. He'll be impossible to be around for a week or so. We'll be lucky if he stops praying long enough to eat. You shouldn't make fun of him. He's trying very hard. Easy for you to say. You won't have to hang out with the village idiot until Josh gets over this. But aren't you touched by who he is? What he is? What good would that do me? If I was basking in the light of his holiness all the time, how would I take care of him? Who would do all of his lying and cheating for him? Even Josh can't think about what he is all the time, Maggie. I think about him all the time. I pray for him all the time. Really? You ever pray for me? I mentioned you in my prayers once. You did? How? I asked God to help you to not be such a doofus so you could watch over Joshua. You meant doofus in an attractive way, right? Of course.